A child was born beneath the towers of Sereno. His bloodline was noble, his name ancient. His birth was meant to bring prestige to House Dooku, the last great ruling family of the planet. But before the boy could walk, before he could speak, his fate was no longer his own. The galaxy did not wait for his innocence. They say the Force does not choose favorites, but in rare moments it speaks too loudly to be ignored. The child's abilities manifested early. Doors trembled when he cried, the wind changed when he laughed, and his father Count Gora saw only danger in his eyes. Dooku was not feared by the world, he was feared by the ones who were supposed to love him. The Jedi came swiftly. They did not bargain, they did not plead. The Order had been watching, and once they confirmed the strength of the Force within him, they made their decision. A single nod, a quiet agreement, and the child was taken. No last embrace, no final words. Dooku would grow up believing his parents gave him away. But the truth was worse. They let him go because they were afraid of what he might become. The journey to Coruscant was silent. The child did not cry, not because he understood, but because the bond between him and his family had already been broken. Sereno vanished behind him, shrinking into starlight, and in its place, a promise that he would become something greater than royalty. But even then, the Force whispered differently. He arrived at the Jedi Temple like all the others, wrapped in brown cloth, carried in silence, handed to strangers who smiled too softly and spoke too kindly. He was not special here, not yet. But deep inside, the child already felt the separation. He was not like the others. They had come from nothing, from war, from pain. But he had come from power. He had been born into a name. And now he had no name at all. He was simply an initiate. The Jedi believed the past must be severed, that attachment was the seed of suffering. But for Dooku, the wound was too fresh to heal. He did not know the language to describe it. He did not understand the pain that clung to him. He only knew that something had been stolen, not just his family, but his place in the galaxy. Years would pass before he would hear the name Sereno again. And when he did, it would not feel like home. It would feel like a ghost. The temple became his world. The high ceilings, the cold stone, the endless corridors lined with statues of Jedi long dead. He walked them as a boy, smaller than the pillars, more quiet than the droids. And though the masters praised his discipline, he never smiled. He did not rage, he did not resist, but every lesson sank into him like a command, not a gift. The Force, they said, was life itself, but for Dooku, it had become a leash, one he would wear with elegance, and someday, with hatred. He was a child of nobility. Now, he was just another initiate. But the blood in his veins had not forgotten, and somewhere, in the deepest levels of the temple, in the shadows of ancient holocrons and forbidden texts, a truth was waiting to be found. A truth the Jedi would never give him. And one day, he would take it for himself. The Jedi did not rescue him. They claimed him. To the Order, Dooku's arrival was not a tragedy, it was protocol. One more Force-sensitive child, removed before attachment could form. One more mind to shape before questions could grow. But Dooku had already seen too much. Even as an infant, he remembered the faces that did not weep. He remembered a home that did not miss him. And in the stillness of the Jedi Temple, he began to wonder if he had ever been wanted at all. The Jedi taught silence, calm, detachment. They called it peace. But for a child raised on the memory of rejection, it became something colder. He was assigned a dormitory, one of many. Dozens of younglings slept in silence, the same silence that filled the temple's endless chambers. The same silence that pressed into Dooku's heart, night after night, like a memory refusing to fade. He was told to let go, but he didn't know how. Dooku excelled. He showed discipline, poise, and clarity. While others stumbled through kata, he moved like a whisper. While some feared the training droids, he dismantled them with precision. The masters praised his focus. They spoke of balance, of calm, of potential. But they never asked what he felt. Not once. His power grew fast, too fast. Within months, he could move objects with ease, manipulate his environment, influence the behavior of those around him. He was not boastful. He was not cruel. But something in him remained apart. The other children laughed together. They whispered jokes. They created bonds in secret small rebellions beneath the eyes of the masters. Dooku sat alone, not by force, by instinct. He did not know the word for it then, but he was already building a mask. One evening, Master Yoda came to observe the initiates. The air changed when he entered. His presence calmed the chamber. Even the most excitable younglings stood straighter. Dooku did not move. Yoda watched him in silence, and in that moment, the child saw something few others ever did: recognition, not of greatness, but of danger. Yoda felt it, not fear, not rage, but clarity, a mind that did not bend easily, a soul that would one day choose. The Grand Master requested to oversee Dooku's training more closely. He would become a guiding presence in the boy's life, not a father, not a mentor, but something more distant, a lighthouse far from shore. Under Yoda's watch, Dooku grew sharper. His philosophy deepened, his technique became nearly flawless, but so too did his sense of isolation. For the more he learned, the less he felt understood. The Force surrounded him, moved through him, but it did not comfort him. It asked for obedience, and Dooku, even then, was not made to obey. He began to read beyond the assigned texts, to listen longer to the Master's debates, to sit near the archive terminals when no one watched. He asked questions few dared ask, about the origins of the Sith, about the wars the Jedi had lost, about the darkness that lived in their own records. The librarians frowned, the elders dismissed, but none stopped him, because none believed he would ever fall. He was Dooku, brilliant, measured, controlled. But within him, the question never left. Why must light demand silence? Why must peace mean forgetting? And in that question, the first fracture began to form. Not in his power, but in his faith. The temple was vast, but it never felt alive. Countless beings passed through its stone corridors, masters in long robes, droids humming softly, younglings whispering lessons to one another. But to Dooku, it all moved like a memory repeating itself. Nothing changed, nothing spoke. Only the silence remained. He spent his days in meditation halls, training dojos, and ancient libraries, and still, he felt more drawn to shadows than light. Not because he hated what the Jedi taught, but because something essential was always missing. He could feel it, a shape behind the words, a hollow in every truth. When masters spoke of peace, he thought of compliance. When they spoke of balance, he saw control. The Order claimed to serve the Force, but they never questioned whether they had buried part of it. Dooku did, and that made him dangerous. Not because he disobeyed, but because he obeyed too well. He became everything they asked: perfect form, measured tone, controlled emotions. His lightsaber practice bordered on elegance. His academic knowledge grew faster than any in his generation. He was what the Jedi admired. But inside, the boy remained unanswered. He began to drift further from the other younglings. Even the warmest of them felt distant. They played in the room of 1,000 fountains, but he sat near the water alone. They sparred for fun, laughing after defeats. He practiced in silence, striking the training droid with precision, not expression. The temple was never cruel, but it was cold. Cold in the way a statue is cold. Beautiful, imposing, empty. Dooku's instructors took notice. They did not punish him. They praised his dedication, then whispered concerns when he left. They said he struggled with connection, that he was too serious, too withdrawn. But no one reached him, because no one could. He began spending hours in the archives, not just reading, but listening. Some records were sealed, others restricted, but Dooku found paths others did not. He memorized entry codes, observed the schedules of archivists. He did not break rules. He simply moved around them. And in doing so, he found stories the Jedi had hidden. He read of the 100-year darkness, of Jedi who had questioned the code and were cast out. He learned of the Mandalorian Wars, the failure of the Jedi to act, and the rise of those who did. Revan, Malak, Zendor. The Masters called them fallen, but Dooku saw something else. Conviction. He never said the names aloud, but they echoed in him. One day, in a small corner of the archives, he discovered a half-erased manuscript detailing Jedi interactions with the Sith on ancient worlds. He copied what he could, memorized what he couldn't. And as he read, something inside him shifted. The Force was not light or dark. It was deeper, older, and more complete than the Jedi were willing to accept. That night, as others slept, Dooku sat alone in the meditation chamber. He stared into the endless light of the temple spires and felt nothing. No peace, no fear, just silence. He wondered if the Jedi were afraid of the dark or of the truth it carried. He did not speak these thoughts, but they stayed with him, growing like roots beneath stone. He was still a child, still obedient, still alone. But something in him had already turned, not toward darkness, but toward understanding. Dooku's first fracture did not come from anger. It came from truth. He was still young when the dreams began. Faint at first, a pale room, a cold hall, a woman turning away before he could reach her. But each night, the shadows sharpened, faces appeared, voices echoed, and though he had never known his mother, he felt her presence pulling at him, as if the Force itself was trying to return something the Jedi had taken. The Masters told him dreams were natural, a mind adjusting, a spirit expanding. But Dooku sensed more. These visions were not imagination. They were memories trying to survive. For the first time, he felt something stronger than discipline. He felt longing. The Jedi instructed him to let go, to release all attachments, even those he never had the chance to form. But how do you release something that still calls your name? One afternoon, while the other younglings studied, Dooku slipped back into the archives. He searched the genealogical records. He searched the diplomatic census. He searched every database he could access. Serenno appeared only once, a record of the planet, a list of its noble houses, nothing more. But he did not need text to know the truth. The darkness in his visions matched the darkness in his blood. Master Sifo-Dyas found him there. The older initiate had always been strange, but kind. a quiet boy with eyes that saw too much. He sat beside Dooku without a word, as if he already understood. "You're searching for something," Sifo Dyas whispered. Dooku did not answer, could not answer. Sifo's gaze softened. "The Force gives us hints, pieces, but it never gives the whole picture." Dooku turned to him. "Then, why does it show me this?" "Because it knows you're strong enough to hold it." It was the first time anyone had spoken to him without judgment, but it did not ease the ache. Instead, it fed the question inside him, the question the Jedi refused to face. Why must truth be forbidden? In training, the cracks widened. During a sparring lesson, another youngling taunted him a harmless remark, nothing more. But something sharp tore through Dooku's calm. He moved faster than intended. The strike landed too hard. The boy fell. The room froze. The masters intervened. They praised his skill, but warned him of excess emotion. Told him to breathe. Told him to center. Told him to forget. But Dooku did not forget. He had not been angry. He had been precise. He had been exact. The Force had flowed cleanly through him without hesitation, without doubt. Yet the Jedi treated it as a mistake. Why was clarity considered dangerous? Late that night, he walked alone through the Hall of Knighthood. Statues towered above him, carved faces of ancient Jedi, warriors who had brought peace through fire and sacrifice. They were remembered as heroes, but their histories were written in conflict the Order now refused to discuss. The silence of the temple returned, heavy, suffocating. He ran his hand along the edge of a statue's stone cloak and wondered if even they had questioned the code. If they, too, had felt this same emptiness. When he closed his eyes, Sereno appeared again. The halls, the cold faces, the moment he had been taken, and the truth he had always known but never spoken. The Jedi had not saved him from darkness. They had stolen him from a life he never had the chance to choose. The fracture inside him did not break anything, it simply opened. A space the Jedi could not fill. A truth the Force would not silence. And a destiny that, one day, would decide the fate of the galaxy. They did not assign Dooku to Master Yoda. Yoda chose him. It wasn't announced. No ceremony, no reason given, only a quiet shift in routine. And suddenly, Dooku was walking beside the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. The other initiates whispered in the corners, too distant to understand, but Dooku felt it immediately. This was not an honor. It was an observation. Yoda trained very few. Over 800 years, only a handful of apprentices had ever stood beneath his shadow. Dooku became one of them not because he was gifted, but because he was being watched. From the beginning, the training was different, sharper, finer, less forgiving. There was no kindness in it, no cruelty either, only precision. Yoda expected mastery not in time, but from the start, and Dooku, for reasons he couldn't name, refused to fail. Their lessons stretched long into the evenings. While others slept, Dooku stood in the silent halls of the temple, lightsaber in hand, following a form Yoda had taught him without words. Again, and again, and again. His body moved through the kata like wind across stone, flowing, polished, controlled, but never free. Yoda rarely praised him, rarely corrected him. He simply watched, measured, studied. Dooku began to feel more like a subject than a student, but he said nothing. He pushed harder, read deeper, practiced longer. If he could not be accepted, he would be undeniable. He learned languages older than the Republic, studied hyperspace anomalies, memorized the locations of Jedi tombs and lost battles, not because he was told to, but because he could not stop himself. The Order had rules, but Dooku had hunger, and Yoda never stopped watching. One afternoon, they meditated in the upper gardens. The sky was quiet. A soft breeze moved through the temple trees. Dooku kept his posture still, eyes closed, mind focused. He reached into the Force, not as a tool, but as a question. And something stirred. A presence. Not Yoda, not the Jedi. Something older, deeper. It vanished before he could hold it. When he opened his eyes, Yoda was already looking at him. "See something, did you?" the Master asked. Dooku hesitated. "I don't know." Yoda tilted his head. "No, you do. Afraid to say you are." It was not rebuke, it was fact. And for the first time, Dooku realized the truth. Yoda knew exactly what was happening inside him, and chose not to intervene. Dooku had never feared the dark. He had feared being wrong. But now he understood something worse. The Masters knew how fragile the line was, and they trained their students not to cross it, but to ignore it. Still, he did not rebel. He obeyed, perfectly. He mastered Ataru, though it did not suit him. He passed trials of logic, endurance, and negotiation. In every chamber, in every test, he performed with elegance, with discipline, with restraint, but he was never truly seen. Except by Yoda. They never spoke of home, never spoke of past. Dooku never learned why Yoda chose him. He only knew that under the Grand Master's silence, he was being molded into something the Jedi needed and feared. An apprentice of the light. But only on the surface. Because underneath the robes, the silence remained. A silence Yoda never tried to fill. Dooku's greatest strength was not his discipline. It was his questioning. From the moment he became Yoda's apprentice, his mind refused to stay still. While other Padawans learned the code and accepted it without hesitation, Dooku wanted more. He wanted meaning behind every line, purpose behind every rule, and answers the Order was never willing to give. The Jedi believed curiosity was a path that must be guided, but in Dooku's case, it became something they tried quietly to contain. He noticed it first during temple lectures. When Masters spoke of the Force as harmony, he wondered why they never spoke of its storms. When they described the dark side as corruption, he wondered how corruption began. Did it come from choice or from silence? He asked these questions, calmly, respectfully, but each time, the Masters shared a look, a silent warning to one another before giving him the same answer. Some truths are not for study. The moment they said it, something in Dooku hardened. Truth did not fear questions. Only lies did. He carried that thought with him everywhere, into combat drills, into meditation halls, into every quiet corner of the Jedi Temple where shadows gathered beneath the statues of forgotten warriors. At night, he walked the halls alone. He read inscriptions carved thousands of years before he was born. He memorized the names of fallen Jedi, lost battles, and vanished orders. He studied the patterns of galactic history, patterns of cycles, of collapses, of the Order hiding its own failures under the guise of wisdom. The Jedi taught obedience, yet their archives were filled with from those who had disobeyed and lost. One evening, after a long session of lightsaber training, Dooku found himself standing in front of a mural depicting the Great Hyperspace War. Jedi against Sith, light against dark. The image was clear, heroic, absolute. But something about it felt simplified. Too clean. He traced the edge of the mural with his fingers, feeling the grooves in the stone. "These Jedi," he whispered, "they fought for peace. But why does peace always follow war?" A voice answered from behind him. "Because peace must be defended." It was Master Costana, one of the few Jedi who believed in studying ancient dangers. She watched him with interest, not caution. For a moment, Dooku felt something rare. Understanding. But it faded quickly. Even she would not tell him everything. Even she feared where questions might lead. Dooku bowed and left, but the thought stayed with him like an ember pressed beneath his ribs. Why must defense always become destruction? He asked Yoda once. The Grand Master closed his eyes and said only, "Trust the Force, you must." It was the one answer Dooku could never accept. He trusted the Force. He did not trust how the Order used it. His lessons grew sharper, more probing. When training with other Padawans, he asked why their techniques favored certain motions, why diplomacy always required certain compromises, why the code forbade attachment yet demanded loyalty. The others didn't know how to answer. They didn't understand why he cared. They followed the path laid before them. Dooku walked beside the path, always questioning the stones beneath it. His mind refused rest. Even in meditation, he sensed something beneath the silence, a current the Jedi ignored, a truth they feared. And the more he listened, the more he felt a divide growing inside him. It was not darkness. Not yet. It was clarity. Clarity that the Order was teaching half of what the Force truly was and expecting him to accept it as whole. And in that quiet realization, the second fracture formed. A small shift. A subtle turn. But enough to change the fate of the Jedi forever. The Jedi Temple held more than silence. It held secrets. Some were kept out of caution, others out of shame, but none were marked clearly. The deepest truths were not locked behind walls, they were buried beneath layers of indifference, forgotten deliberately by those who no longer wished to remember. Dooku began to see through the patterns. He memorized the archive schedules, which masters worked which shifts, which terminals responded to which clearance levels. He never broke the rules. He simply moved within them, quietly, carefully, as if the Force itself was opening doors no one else dared approach. He started with the historical accounts, the early Jedi schisms, the exile of the Jedi, the first great schism. What began as names and dates soon became something else, a trail. Every so-called heretic had started with a question, every exile a contradiction, and every war a silence that had lasted too long. The deeper he went, the more the walls around him seemed to whisper. These were not villains. They were seekers. He studied the story of Zendor, the first fallen Jedi, of how he challenged the Council's authority and was cast out. He read of Freeden Nad, who sought forbidden knowledge not to destroy the Jedi, but because they refused to explain it. He found fragments of writings attributed to Jedi who had vanished, not fallen, their legacies erased. What the Order called danger, Dooku began to see as denial. And in that denial, he found a kind of betrayal. One record stood out, a partial archive from the time of the new Sith Wars. It mentioned a Jedi Knight who had uncovered ancient Sith holocrons and vanished from the temple without a trace. No name, no ending, just a warning. Curiosity can unravel the soul. Dooku copied that line. He wrote it in the margins of his journal. He stared at it for hours, trying to understand what frightened the Masters so deeply. He wasn't searching for power. He was searching for balance. If the Jedi were right, if the dark side was only destruction, then why did it continue to return, again and again? Empires fell, orders collapsed. The Sith rose, the Jedi endured. But always, the same mistakes returned in different faces. What if they weren't mistakes? What if the Force was never meant to be split? He read until his eyes ached, until the archive droids turned to observe him, until the temple lights dimmed and the halls emptied. The quiet no longer disturbed him, it steadied him. Because now, he understood the silence. It wasn't peace, it was fear. One night, he stumbled across a fragment of a Sith prophecy, damaged, untranslated, hidden beneath a false entry. It spoke of balance not as light's victory, but as union. Of a being who would bring darkness and light into one will. The words were faded, broken, but Dooku copied them by hand. Not because he believed, but because he needed to understand why the Jedi did not. He began meditating in the archive rotundas alone, with only the hum of old lights and the soft flicker of data streams above him. The Force there felt different, not darker, just deeper. And he could feel something growing within him. Not ambition, not rebellion, awareness. That the Jedi were training him to fight shadows while refusing to admit their own. When he returned to his quarters, his datapads were filled with notes the Order would never allow. Questions no master would answer. Visions the Council would label dangerous. And still, Yoda said nothing. Because perhaps, like Dooku, he too knew the truth. The brightest light cannot survive without shadow. And one day, the shadow would come from within. Dooku rose quickly through the ranks of training. Too quickly. While others struggled to find balance in their forms, he moved with a precision that felt almost unnatural. His saber arcs were clean, measured, almost elegant. His footwork silent. His posture unbroken. Each lesson Yoda gave him, he mastered before the day ended, not because he wished to impress, but because he could not bear imperfection. To the other Padawans, Dooku seemed untouchable, a prodigy, a standard none could match. They admired him, yet drifted away from him. His discipline created distance, his silence created mystery, and his strength created fear. Not open fear, not spoken fear, the quiet kind, the kind that made others bow their heads when he entered a room. But Dooku felt none of it. His excellence brought him no comfort. Each compliment sounded hollow, each achievement left him emptier. He could sense the admiration, but never the warmth behind it. There was grace in his movements, but no peace in his heart. During sparring drills, he followed every instruction exactly, never overstepping, never showing emotion. Yet each clash of sabers carried a weight he couldn't name. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pride. It was something much simpler. A question. Why did mastery feel like loss? One afternoon, he defeated 3 Padawans in quick succession. The training room fell silent. Even the instructor paused, unsure whether to praise him or caution him. Dooku bowed, expression calm, and stepped aside. But inside, the emptiness grew sharper. These victories were not victories, they were reminders that he was always alone. Yoda observed from a distance. His eyes narrowed, not in disappointment, but in concern. The Grand Master could sense what others could not: the widening space inside Dooku, the quiet ache that discipline could never fill. Yet Yoda said nothing. Perhaps he believed silence was guidance. Perhaps he trusted the Force to speak. But the Force, to Dooku, spoke in riddles he was never allowed to solve. He continued to study relentlessly: philosophy, galactic lore, diplomacy, combat theory. He devoured knowledge, seeking something that finally answered the ache beneath his calm exterior. Yet the more he learned, the more he saw cracks in the Order's teachings. Lessons contradicted history. Philosophy contradicted action. Peace contradicted war. The Jedi spoke of letting go, yet held fiercely to ancient traditions. They preached detachment, yet demanded loyalty. They warned against the dark side, yet refused to explain it. And Dooku, with his restless mind, could not ignore the contradictions. He approached Master Yoda one evening, as the sun cast long shadows across the training courtyard. "Master," he said quietly, "how do we claim peace when the galaxy is always in conflict?" Yoda closed his eyes. "Learn to see peace within. You must." Dooku bowed respectfully, but the answer left him hollow. Peace within meant nothing when truth outside was broken. He walked away with a realization he wished he had never felt. The Jedi did not fear darkness. They feared complexity. Despite everything, Dooku continued to shine. His missions as a Padawan were successful. His negotiation training was flawless. His saber work became a thing of legend among the instructors. Every master who saw him spoke the same words: "He is destined for greatness." But none asked what he wanted. None noticed the shift in his eyes during meditation, the long pauses before he answered a question, the way he hesitated when speaking the code, not in confusion, but in doubt. He was becoming a Jedi the Order could proudly claim. Yet, with every lesson completed, every praise offered, every truth avoided, another piece of him slid quietly away. The Jedi shaped a night of conviction, but they never saw that, beneath the grace, Dooku was already drifting toward a future that no master could stop. The ceremony was brief. He stood in the hall of knighthood, the silence broken only by the hum of Yoda's saber as it passed above each shoulder. No applause, no celebration, just the soft echo of footsteps as he rose. Dooku was now a Jedi Knight, the youngest of his generation, the most accomplished, the most controlled. But inside, there was no joy, only stillness. The temple spoke of him with pride. They called him refined, scholarly, gifted in diplomacy and defense. He became the Order's preferred representative to systems in dispute, its trusted emissary to senators whose ambitions grew larger than their oaths. Even in the Senate, his name began to carry weight. But Dooku did not want recognition. He wanted to understand what they were truly serving. Mission after mission, he traveled to worlds far from the core, places the Jedi spoke of in theory but rarely visited in truth. There, he saw decay, not just in buildings or borders or failing governments, but in the spirit of the Republic itself. Senators who bought silence with credits, corporations that traded in lives, worlds ignored by the core because they offered no profit. The Jedi were sent to mediate. But Dooku knew that was a lie. They were sent to delay collapse. He walked into these assignments like a ghost in a warrior's robe, lightsaber at his hip, words sharpened with purpose. His presence carried weight. Even the most defiant planetary governors hesitated in his shadow. He brought order where others failed. But the cost was rising. Each resolution was temporary, each peace brittle. Behind every agreement he brokered, there was another injustice waiting to surface. And behind every grateful senator was a system quietly being drained. Dooku wrote reports, clear and precise. He urged the council to act, to investigate corruption deeper within the Senate, to question the lobbying arms of the Trade Federation, to protect Outer Rim worlds from the predatory laws being passed in the core. The council responded with thanks and silence. Yoda, too, offered no reply, only calm eyes and reminders that Jedi must serve without attachment to outcome, to trust the will of the Force. But Dooku no longer believed the Force was guiding the Republic. He returned from missions with scars no one could see, not from battle but from what he witnessed. Children in the streets of Raxus Prime, wearing corporate uniforms instead of clothes. Colonists on Anshan forced to sell water back to the companies that poisoned it. He was praised for bringing peace. But he no longer believed peace existed. Even among the Jedi, he began to sense the shift. Younger knights spoke of duty, but not meaning. The halls of the temple echoed with tradition, but not conviction. Initiates were taught to question nothing, to obey the code, to follow. Dooku had followed. He had become the perfect Jedi. But something inside him still remembered Serenno, not as home but as origin. A reminder that bloodlines held power, that names carried weight, that a Jedi was not made less human by abandoning his past. He had abandoned his past. And now he wondered, what had he truly become? He continued to serve, continued to succeed, but each mission deepened the space between what he did and what he believed. They called him noble, but he felt nothing noble in what he was asked to protect. He had not broken any rules. But the man who stood under the title of Jedi Knight was no longer convinced the Order knew what it stood for. And that realization would not fade. The Jedi called it peacekeeping. But Dooku began to see it differently. His missions grew longer, more frequent. He was sent to border worlds, corporate territories, disputed colonies. Places where conflict didn't wear armor, but paper hidden behind treaties, tariffs, and legal documents written in bloodless ink. The Jedi arrived too late, too often. And when they did arrive, they were asked to settle the terms of surrender, not stop the suffering. He remembered a mission to Sullust. A mining strike had turned violent. Workers had refused to process refined starship fuel for the Techno-Union unless their contracts were renewed. When Dooku arrived, the air was heavy with carbon dust, and the bodies of the first protesters still lay in the street. The Union's envoy smiled. They called it an unfortunate delay in negotiations. Dooku brought calm. He negotiated. He even convinced the workers to return to the tunnels in exchange for an increase in medical allowances. But 2 weeks after he left, the Union revoked the terms. No Jedi returned. No one even filed a follow-up. It was just another resolved conflict, buried beneath the illusion of order. And it was not the only one. On Ertugas, the Republic refused to intervene when a planetary government began forcibly relocating its native population to make way for trade ports. The Council feared that siding with one culture would spark secession. Dooku sent a full report. It was received. But no action was taken. He began to notice the same patterns again and again. Jedi sent to put out fires they had no authority to extinguish. Republic interests overriding planetary autonomy. Corruption disguised as compromise. And at the center of it all, a slow, quiet collapse no one wanted to name. He did not rage. He withdrew. His responses in council meetings grew colder, fewer words, fewer smiles. The Padawans who once watched him with admiration now avoided his presence. They could feel it, the gravity around him. Heavy, focused, unsatisfied. Even his lightsaber style began to shift. He turned away from the aggressive flourishes of Ataru, adopted a style that mirrored his mindset: precise, minimal, controlled. Makashi, elegant, direct, detached. He no longer dueled to impress. He dueled to end conflict before it began. And yet, inside, conflict never left him. He did not speak of it to Yoda. He no longer saw the point. The old master had taught him many things: patience, precision, clarity, but never conviction, never defiance. Yoda trusted the Force. Dooku trusted what he saw. And what he saw was a republic rotting from within. He began declining missions that felt performative, turned down Senate invitations cloaked in flattery. Instead, he returned to his archives, requesting access to older records, ones untouched in decades. He reread files on the Ruusan Reformation, noticed how many Jedi titles were lost, how much power had been surrendered after the Sith Wars. He did not miss war, but he missed honesty. Because now, the Jedi served a government that only wanted their image, not their wisdom. He began to write his own records, private logs, notes on every mission, every discrepancy, every hidden failure beneath the surface of peace. He no longer believed the Jedi were protectors. They were symbols, polished, revered, and hollow. Dooku continued to serve, continued to speak with calm, but his gaze, once filled with belief, had turned sharp. Not with hatred, with clarity. And each day, that clarity pulled him one step further from the light he once served without question. Dooku's reputation changed long before he noticed it. At first, he was the Jedi Knight others admired: calm, controlled, diplomatic. But as the years passed, something in his presence shifted. He became quieter, sharper, more decisive. Where other Jedi sought compromise, Dooku sought truth. And the truth, he found, rarely favored the Republic. Word spread. A governor on Arcania described him as a Jedi with steel in his eyes. A diplomat on Sereno, unaware of Dooku's origins, whispered that he carried himself more like a king than a servant. The Senate respected him, the common people feared him, and the Jedi didn't know what to make of him. His missions continued, each one a mirror showing him something darker. A famine on Felucia, handled by a company that charged starving families for aid. A relief convoy to Onderon delayed because a senator's rival wanted political leverage. A border skirmish on Zygeria that revealed the quiet return of slave markets the Republic pretended did not exist. Dooku dealt with each situation swiftly, efficiently, but with each success, another doubt formed. One day, on a remote moon near the expansion region, Dooku confronted a group of mercenaries hired by a corrupt official to force miners off their own land. He deflected blaster fire with perfect precision, disarmed the leader with a single motion, ended the standoff before anyone died. The miners thanked him. The official apologized. The Republic closed the case. But Dooku felt nothing. He returned to the ship in silence. His Padawan at the time, Rael Avaros, walked beside him, unsure whether to speak. Rael had always been rough around the edges, impulsive, emotional. But he saw what others missed. He placed a hand on Dooku's arm. "Master, are we doing any good out here?" Dooku paused. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. "We prevent greater harm," he said softly. Rael frowned, but the harm keeps coming back. The conversation lingered in Dooku's mind, because Rael was right. He found himself returning to the archives again, searching through old war journals, accounts from Jedi who had fought in the Sith Wars. He saw the same pattern repeated long before he was born: victory followed by decline, peace followed by corruption. The Jedi fought darkness, but never addressed the wounds left behind. The Order claimed the Sith were gone, but Dooku could feel something beneath the surface. Not Sith, not yet, but an imbalance the Jedi refused to name. He meditated on it, sought guidance, found only silence. During council meetings, he began to speak more bluntly, questioning decisions, challenging reports, asking why aid was offered selectively, why the Republic's laws bent to the wealthy, why entire systems begged for help while the Senate debated in comfort. Some masters agreed quietly, none openly. Yoda listened with calm patience, but Dooku sensed distance now, as if the Grand Master hoped time would smooth away his concerns. But time did nothing. Missions only sharpened what Dooku already knew. The Jedi were defending a structure that no longer upheld its own ideals. One evening, after mediating a border dispute on Kiros, Dooku stood alone beneath the stars, the planet's surface shimmering below him like glass. He looked toward the core worlds, where senators dined in palaces while frontier families rationed water. The Jedi served both, but only one shaped the laws that guided them. Dooku closed his eyes. He did not feel anger. He felt inevitability. The doubt inside him was no longer a whisper. It had taken form, steady and cold. He still served the Jedi. He still carried their blade. But his loyalty was no longer blind. Some truths could not be unlearned, and Dooku had seen too many. Dooku began to see himself with the same clarity he used to judge the galaxy. He noticed how his voice had changed, lower, quieter, shaped more by restraint than hope. He noticed how Padawans no longer approached him with small questions, how knights gave him respectful space, and how masters regarded him with the kind of silence usually reserved for storms on the horizon. He did not resent them. He understood them. His presence had become heavy, not threatening, not dark, just certain. And certainty, in a galaxy built on compromise, was unsettling. He felt it most during council sessions. As he stood in the circular chamber listening to debates, he watched the way decisions were made. Slowly, politically, fearfully. Jedi once acted from conviction. Now they acted from caution, from obligation, from concern over how the Senate might react. They called it wisdom. Dooku called it hesitation. One night, after a particularly frustrating meeting about trade routes in the Mid-Rim, Dooku lingered in the council tower long after the others had gone. The lights were dim, the air still. He walked to the center of the chamber and stood where Yoda usually sat. From this place, the galaxy was supposed to seem clearer. Instead, it looked broken. He thought of the younglings in training halls, repeating the code without understanding it. He thought of the knights exhausted from missions that only delayed suffering. He thought of senators who smiled at Jedi emissaries while signing laws that fed private armies and corporate empires. And for the first time, he wondered if the Jedi had already lost not to the Sith, but to complacency. He left the chamber quietly, walking the long halls of the temple as if seeing them for the first time. The statues of ancient Jedi looked down at him, heroes who had fought real wars. Masters who had made real sacrifices. Their stone faces carried conviction. Conviction the modern order had forgotten. In the room of 1,000 fountains, he found Sifo-Dyas kneeling beside the water. His old friend sensed him enter and rose slowly. They had grown distant over the years, each lost in their own path yet still connected by threads the order could never erase. "You feel it too," Sifo murmured. Dooku didn't ask what he meant. There was no need. "We are blind," Sifo continued. "The galaxy is changing, and the Council refuses to see it." Dooku sat beside him. The soft rush of falling water filled the silence between them. "What do you see?" he asked. Sifo's voice trembled. "Chaos, war, a darkness waiting in the cracks of the Republic. I don't know its name, but it's coming." Dooku closed his eyes. He did not share Sifo's visions, but he did not doubt them. The imbalance he sensed on every mission, in every negotiation, was part of something larger, a shift the Jedi were too afraid to confront. "We should prepare," Dooku said quietly. "We can't," Sifo answered. "The Council won't approve anything that might anger the Senate." There it was. The truth neither of them could ignore. The Jedi no longer served the Force. They served permission. Dooku stood, his reflection rippling in the water below. He looked older than he felt, not in years, but in burden. The man who once believed in the Order with his whole heart, now saw its flaws carved into every decision. He still respected the Jedi. He still honored their legacy. But something inside him had shifted permanently. The Order's gaze remained fixed outward on peace, on treaty, on image. Dooku's gaze had turned inward. And in the quiet depths of his own certainty, he sensed a truth the Jedi refused to face. If the Order could not change, something else would rise to take its place. The day Dooku took a Padawan, something in him shifted. He had resisted the idea for years, not out of fear or arrogance, but because he saw what the Order had become, and he questioned whether it deserved to pass itself on. The Council disagreed, and quietly they selected the boy. Qui-Gon Jinn. He was barely more than a child, but even then, Dooku could feel it, a presence in the Force unlike any he had ever known. Not powerful in the traditional sense, not aggressive, not even disciplined, but alive. Where Dooku moved with precision, Qui-Gon moved with instinct. Where Dooku questioned with caution, Qui-Gon questioned with sincerity. He was impulsive, reckless, emotionally transparent in a way that made the other Padawans uneasy. Dooku saw it immediately. The boy felt too much. And yet, he didn't turn him away. He accepted him quietly, as if some unseen part of him already knew this would not be a typical training bond. And from their very first mission, that truth made itself clear. They were sent to Kashyyyk to resolve a dispute between Wookiee elders and Republic contractors trying to tear down sacred forests. Dooku approached the conflict with his usual discipline. Calm words, diplomatic logic, measured offers. Qui-Gon didn't wait. The moment he saw the scars in the trees, the pain in the Wookiee's eyes, he moved to defend them, without orders, without permission. Dooku was furious, but deep down he admired it. Not the disobedience, the conviction. It was a conviction Dooku had once known, long ago, before compromise became expected and silence became necessary. In the years that followed, they traveled the galaxy together, a master sculpted by precision and a Padawan led by instinct. They disagreed often, argued quietly, but something unspoken bound them. Dooku never said it aloud. He didn't need to. He loved the boy. Not sentimentally, not possessively, but in the rare way Jedi were never supposed to. He cared. He saw in Qui-Gon the courage he had once buried, the softness he had armored over, the belief that instinct could be more honest than tradition. And for a while, Dooku allowed himself to hope. He taught Qui-Gon everything he could, not just lightsaber forms or diplomatic protocol, but how to question without losing control, how to doubt without falling. He shared pieces of history others considered dangerous, ancient texts, forgotten teachings. Qui-Gon never recoiled. He listened. And in that listening, Dooku felt understood. But it wasn't just understanding, it was reflection. The more Qui-Gon grew, the more Dooku saw his own unrest mirrored in the boy but transformed. Where Dooku's questioning had led him to cold certainty, Qui-Gon's led him to compassionate defiance. And Dooku didn't know how to stop it. He watched his student grow taller, stronger, more confident. He watched him follow the living force in ways no master had taught. He watched him speak truth in council chambers, even when it earned silence. And he began to realize something painful. Qui-Gon did not need him. The boy with too much heart was becoming a Jedi the Order didn't know how to accept. And Dooku, the one man who might have guided him gently, was slowly being left behind. But he said nothing. He offered corrections where he could, silence where he couldn't, and pride where no one else would. He saw what the Council didn't. Qui-Gon Jinn was not the future of the Jedi. He was what the Jedi were supposed to be. And Dooku could no longer claim the same. Dooku trained Qui-Gon to seek truth, but he hadn't expected the boy to find it. Their missions began to change, not in form but in feeling. The assignments were ordinary enough. Trade disputes, border conflicts, missing persons. But something in the Force followed them now. Patterns Dooku couldn't ignore, echoes Qui-Gon couldn't forget. On Obradan, they uncovered evidence of a senator's smuggling cortosis under the guise of agricultural aid. The Council ordered discretion. The case was closed quietly. On Tyth, a planetary militia had been armed by Republic contractors to destabilize a rival system. The Senate denied involvement. The Jedi were told to withdraw. And on Brental IV, a delegation of Jedi Masters disappeared after questioning a corporate merger that violated 3 galactic treaties. No follow-up was authorized. Qui-Gon didn't understand. "Why do we keep finding the same rot?" he asked. Dooku gave the only answer he could. Because the Republic no longer wants to see it. But even that wasn't the full truth. Something deeper had begun to stir. In the archives, Qui-Gon found references to a forgotten text, the prophecy of the Chosen One. The Masters refused to speak of it. It was dismissed as myth. A relic from a time when Jedi believed the Force had a will of its own. But Qui-Gon believed it. Not because he needed a savior, but because the prophecy felt alive in the Force. Dooku read the text beside him in silence. The language was old, its meaning unclear, but one line struck him more than the rest. "He who brings balance will walk in both shadow and flame." He stared at those words for a long time. Qui-Gon asked what he thought they meant. Dooku didn't answer. Because he feared he already knew. They traveled next to Sembla, investigating ancient ruins buried beneath the ocean's floor. What they found wasn't Sith, but it wasn't Jedi either. It was older, wilder. A shrine that resonated with the living Force, untouched by doctrine. Qui-Gon was drawn to it immediately. Dooku stood at its edge. Something inside it frightened him. Not in form, in clarity. It reminded him that the Force had no allegiance. Only the Jedi did. On the flight home, Qui-Gon spoke softly. "Why don't the Council teach these things? The shrines, the prophecies, the ancient truths." Dooku looked out the viewport. "Because they're afraid of what they cannot control." It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. The boy's eyes didn't narrow. He didn't doubt. He simply accepted it, and in doing so, stepped into a kind of freedom Dooku had never fully known. Qui-Gon began acting on his own more often, not in defiance, but in faith. He would meditate before making a decision, speak with locals before reviewing orders. He trusted the will of the Force more than the will of the Council. And Dooku couldn't stop him. Because deep down, he agreed. Together, they began gathering fragments, ancient prophecies, political patterns, names of senators who reappeared in the shadows of too many crimes. The pieces didn't form a full picture, but something was wrong, very wrong. Qui-Gon believed the darkness was rising again. Dooku believed it had never left. The Order ignored them both. Each time they returned with evidence, they were thanked, then dismissed, praised for efficiency, not insight, guided back to safer missions, kept away from questions that dug too deep. But it was too late. The truth had already changed them. Dooku had once taught Qui-Gon to trust the Force. Now, he watched him do it. And it terrified him not because he feared what Qui-Gon might become, but because he feared the Jedi would never let him become it at all. Dooku had always believed a Jedi's greatest challenge was mastering the Force. But with Qui-Gon, he learned a different truth. The hardest thing to master was letting someone grow beyond you. It began slowly, small choices, quiet changes, moments Dooku didn't notice until they had already taken root. Qui-Gon's questions became bolder, his instincts stronger, his willingness to follow the living Force more pronounced than anything the code encouraged. On Ord Mantell, Qui-Gon ignored a senator's request for protection so he could defend a village caught between criminal factions. Officially, the mission was to secure the delegation, but Qui-Gon sensed danger among the villagers' fear that ran deeper than politics. He acted, and he was right. But when the report reached the Council, they didn't praise his instincts, they questioned his discipline. Dooku defended him quietly, but the words tasted hollow, because he knew what the Council saw. A Padawan who was beginning to trust the Force more than the Order. Exactly what Dooku had warned them about. Exactly what Dooku could never bring himself to discourage. On another mission, they were tasked with returning a stolen artifact to a wealthy collector on Count. Qui-Gon discovered the artifact was not stolen. It was reclaimed by the native people who believed it held the memory of their ancestors. He refused to return it. Dooku intervened and negotiated a compromise, but the Council later reprimanded them for complicating a straightforward task. Dooku walked out of the meeting without speaking. Qui-Gon followed him through the hall. "You don't agree with them," the boy said quietly. Dooku stopped. For a moment, the truth pressed against his throat. "No," he said. "I do not." Qui-Gon smiled the kind of smile free hearts make, but for Dooku, it cut deeper than any blade. His Padawan was growing, stronger than expected, braver than allowed. And Dooku, who had once questioned everything, now felt himself retreating. Not out of fear for Qui-Gon, out of fear of losing him. He saw the difference during training. When Qui-Gon faced other Padawans, he fought with clarity, with a sense of presence Dooku himself did not possess. The living force flowed through him with an ease that made masters pause at the doorways just to watch. Dooku corrected him less often now. Because there was less to correct, their missions continued, but the dynamic had shifted. Dooku found himself walking a step behind, listening instead of instructing, advising instead of directing. And each time Qui-Gon made a decision before he could give an order, something inside Dooku pulled tight. Not resentment, not jealousy, loss. One evening, after a difficult mission on Telos, Qui-Gon approached him. "Master," he said softly, "I trust the Force, even when the Council doesn't, even when you don't." The words weren't meant to wound, but they did, because Dooku realized something painful in that moment. Qui-Gon was no longer his student. Not truly. He had become something the Jedi rarely produced anymore, a seeker guided by the moment, not the archive. A believer in instinct, not structure. A soul aligned with the living force so strongly that Dooku, despite all his knowledge, could not follow. The next day, the Council reassigned Qui-Gon temporarily to another master for an independent mission, a normal step in training. But Dooku felt it as a rupture. The bond stretched, but it did not break. And yet, when he watched Qui-Gon leave the temple without him, walking with calm certainty toward a future that no longer needed his guidance, Dooku understood the truth he had avoided. He had not lost Qui-Gon's loyalty. He had lost his place in Qui-Gon's path. And for a man who had once been abandoned by everything he trusted, it felt like losing a son. When Qui-Gon returned from his independent mission, Dooku expected things to return to the way they had been. Master and Padawan, teacher and student, two voices traveling one path. But something had changed. Qui-Gon carried himself with a new stillness, not obedience, not rebellion, but certainty. The kind that grows when a person finally trusts their own place in the Force. Dooku saw it the moment the young man stepped off the transport. A quiet shift, a small distance, a new direction. Not away from the Jedi, away from him. They still trained together, still spoke, still shared meals in quiet corners of the temple where memories of old conversations lingered. But the bond had softened. Not broken, just set gently aside, like a childhood toy one still cherishes but no longer needs. It was natural, healthy, even expected. But for Dooku, it felt like betrayal. Not because Qui-Gon was disloyal, because Qui-Gon was becoming everything he had hoped the Jedi could be, and everything Dooku no longer was. Their missions together became rare. When they were assigned, Qui-Gon took the lead more often. He would sense danger before Dooku did, speak truth before it was asked, stand firm even when his master hesitated. On Shurupak, Qui-Gon protected a group of refugees despite the Republic ordering them to be relocated to an unsafe zone. Dooku had argued the case diplomatically. Qui-Gon had simply acted. And when the refugees bowed in gratitude, Qui-Gon bowed lower. Dooku watched him and felt a quiet ache. This was a Jedi the Order didn't deserve. This was a man the galaxy desperately needed. And Dooku was the one being left behind. The final shift came during a debate in the council chambers. Qui-Gon argued that the Jedi must take a more active role against corruption in the Senate. He spoke with calm passion, a kind of gentle fire that filled the room. Dooku agreed with every word. But when he spoke, the council grew cold. When Qui-Gon spoke, the council listened. Not because they respected him more, but because he wasn't angry. He wasn't wounded by years of disappointment. He wasn't carrying fractures carved into him since childhood. He was free in ways Dooku had never been. After the meeting, Dooku walked alone through the temple gardens. The sky was fading to purple. The fountains whispered softly, and he realized something that settled deep into his chest. Qui-Gon had become the Jedi Dooku wanted to be, and the Jedi Dooku could no longer become. That night, Qui-Gon visited him. The room was dim, lit only by Coruscant's glow. He sat across from Dooku with a calm expression, not distant, not cold, but steady. "Master," he said softly, "I want you to know, everything you taught me has shaped who I am. I didn't walk away from you." Dooku swallowed. "It feels like you did." Qui-Gon shook his head. "No, I walked toward the Force. You taught me to do that." The words landed with weight. Beautiful, painful, true. And yet, they did not close the wound. Because the wound wasn't about Qui-Gon. It was about the Jedi Order. An order that dismissed visions, softened truth, and ignored danger. An order that would one day break Qui-Gon, too. Dooku saw the future in that moment. Clearer than prophecy. Sharper than instinct. The council would silence Qui-Gon's warnings. Just as they had silenced his own, they would doubt him, dismiss him, and one day they would fail him. And Dooku would lose the only person he had ever loved without fear. When Qui-Gon left the room, the silence remained. Dooku looked at the doorway long after it closed. This time, the abandonment was not forced, not cruel, not deliberate. It was simply the way of the Force, but to a man already carved by loss. It felt like destiny repeating itself. When Dooku left the Jedi Order, it did not cause outrage. There was no trial, no gathering of masters, no attempt to bring him back. He walked out of the temple with quiet steps, his robe folded neatly beneath one arm, his lightsaber still at his side. And no one followed. Not Yoda, not Windu, not even Qui-Gon. He expected resistance, some protest, a final debate with the council, or perhaps a warning from the archives. But the only thing he received was silence. And it spoke louder than anything else. He stood once more in the hall of knighthood, not to be honored, but to say goodbye. The statues of long-dead masters loomed above him, their faces carved in stone, unblinking, unmoved. The same faces that had watched him kneel as a Padawan, the same eyes that had seen him rise as a knight. Now they saw him as nothing. He passed Sifo Dyers in the hall. The old friend didn't speak, just paused, eyes filled with a sorrow too tangled for words. Dooku nodded once, then kept walking. Even the Force felt quiet. Not absent, just waiting. The council issued no formal statement. The Order merely updated their records. Count Dooku of Serenno, formerly Jedi Master. Voluntary departure. No crimes committed, no charges filed. They called it peaceful withdrawal. But Dooku knew what it really was. Abandonment. The Jedi had always trained him to let go, to detach, to sever bonds before they could root too deeply. But when he walked away from them, it wasn't discipline that filled him. It was grief, not for what he was losing, but for how little it seemed to matter. No students cried out. No younglings asked where he had gone. The temple adjusted, as it always did, folding his absence into its silence like dust settling into stone. It was as if he had never been there at all. He thought, briefly, that Qui-Gon might come, that he would appear at the hangar, say something sharp, something foolish, something filled with love he didn't know how to express. But he didn't. Qui-Gon stayed behind. And that, more than anything, told Dooku the truth. The bond they had shared had changed, it had not broken, but it would never return to what it had been. Not after what they had both seen. Not after what the Order had ignored. As the transport lifted off from Coruscant, Dooku did not look back. The spires of the Jedi Temple faded into the haze of the upper atmosphere. The Senate Dome glinted in the distance, still untouched by the decay it sheltered. He sat alone, staring into hyperspace. He was free now. Free from protocol, free from councils, free from the burden of pretending the Republic was salvageable. But freedom, he realized, felt a lot like exile. And in that exile, Dooku began to understand what had always haunted him. He had given everything to the Jedi, his name, his future, his loyalty. But the moment he asked them to open their eyes, they closed the door. They didn't cast him out. They simply let him go. As if they had always expected this day would come. As if they had never truly believed he was one of them. In the silence that followed, Dooku didn't cry, didn't rage, he only sat still. And for the first time in decades, he allowed himself to feel alone. Serenno had not changed. Its skies were still pale and cold, its cities carved from stone older than the Republic itself. Noble houses ruled from distant towers, their names steeped in wealth, their hearts emptied by centuries of silence. Dooku's ship landed at the edge of the family estate. Tall spires stretched into the clouds like thorns. The old palace stood waiting, untouched by time, a symbol of legacy, pride, and isolation. The servants didn't recognize him at first. Then they bowed, not because they knew him, because they feared the title he had come to claim. Count? He said the word aloud only once, not out of arrogance, but to remember what it meant. His father, Gora, was gone dead for years. Dooku did not attend the funeral. He had not asked for updates. There had been no bond to mourn. Only a bloodline cold and unspoken that now belonged to him. He walked through the halls of his childhood in silence, the same stone floors he had crossed before the Jedi took him. The same corridors where he had heard the whispers of disappointment and disgust before he could understand what they meant. He was no longer the boy they had feared. He was the man they had created by letting him go. Portraits lined the walls, distant ancestors, warriors, politicians, lords who had wielded their names like weapons. Dooku stared at them not with reverence, but with distance. He was one of them now, but he did not belong to them. The throne room was empty when he entered. Just stone, dust, and silence. A ceremonial blade rested on the dais beside the seat of power, an heirloom, untouched for decades. Dooku approached it slowly, his footsteps echoing beneath the high vaulted ceiling. He picked up the blade and held it in his hands. Not a lightsaber, not a weapon of the Jedi, just steel and history. It was heavy, not in weight, in memory. That evening, the nobles of Serenno gathered. Dooku didn't summon them. They came on their own, out of curiosity, out of fear, out of obligation to a title that meant more to them than the man who now carried it. They offered alliances, gifts, condolences for his departure from the Jedi, carefully spoken praise for choosing legacy over dogma. Dooku said little. He watched them the way he had once watched senators, faces behind faces, words behind words, smiles hiding calculations. And he knew the truth. The corruption he had seen in the Senate existed here, too quieter, more subtle, but no less dangerous. These were not leaders. They were caretakers of decay. He let them speak, let them promise, let them welcome him home. But when the gathering ended and the chamber emptied, Dooku remained seated alone at the long table, untouched glass in front of him, ancient symbols carved into the wood beneath his fingers. This was not a return. It was a reclamation. He had not come back to belong. He had come back to stand apart, to build something new, not in defiance of the Jedi, but in mourning of what they could have been. Sereno had given him nothing as a child. Now it gave him everything he needed. A title, a legacy, and silence. The kind of silence that allowed questions to grow, the kind that allowed history to be re-examined, the kind the Jedi never allowed. He was no longer a servant of the Order, and no longer a tool of the Republic. He was Dooku of Sereno, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to lose. From the stone balconies of Sereno, Count Dooku watched the galaxy decay. Not in fire, not in war, but in something colder, the quiet unraveling of belief, the slow death of trust, the kind of decay that doesn't announce itself, but waits in silence until it's too late to undo. The Senate still met. The Jedi still served. But Dooku saw through the rituals. What the galaxy called peace was a structure built on neglect. He read reports, followed transmissions, listened to the diplomatic frequencies the nobility had access to. His estate became a listening post, not for spies, but for truth. Quiet, buried truth. He watched as corporate influence spread through the outer rim, as new taxes starved frontier systems, as military contractors grew richer than some planetary governments. As Jedi were dispatched to calm tensions, their presence only intensified. He no longer needed to imagine what the Order had become. He could see it. Weapons sent to perform diplomacy, knights reduced to symbols, children molded to obey, not understand, all in service of a republic that had lost the will to change. And all of it wrapped in ceremony. He sent letters to Coruscant, long, carefully written warnings addressed to the Jedi Council, thoughtful critiques, offers of insight, suggestions for reform, pleas for honesty. They were acknowledged, then filed away. He received no visits, no arguments, not even a refusal, only silence. Because to them, he no longer existed. He was one of the lost 20 now, a name spoken only in passing, a cautionary tale for idealistic students. Not a traitor, not an enemy, just a disappointment. But Dooku did not regret leaving. He regretted waiting so long to do it. The Order had not failed him. It had failed itself. Late at night, he would walk through the old archives of his estate. Scrolls, records, histories untouched by Jedi curation. He read of past civil wars, of the Sith hiding in plain sight for centuries, of political cycles that repeated under new names. And he began to see the truth. The Jedi were not guardians of peace. They were part of the machine that kept war inevitable. He studied their history not as a student this time, but as a witness. He saw how they had once fought to preserve balance, then shifted to enforcing stability. He saw how they had lost their independence after the Rusan Reformation, how they had traded freedom for structure, power for relevance. And in doing so, they had become the very thing they once warned against. Instruments of systems too large to question. He walked the halls of Sereno alone most days. No students, no counsel, no expectation to speak the code or follow it. The Force flowed through him more clearly now, not louder but freer. He began to sense things before they happened. Ripples of imbalance, patterns, visions not of fire but of collapse. And still, the Jedi did nothing. They clung to their neutrality, sat in their tower above Coruscant, as if wisdom could replace vision, as if tradition could stop what was coming. But Dooku saw what they didn't. The Republic was dying, not quickly, but fully. And the Jedi, in their robes and rituals, would die with it. Not by blade, but by blindness. He sent one final message to the temple. You still have time to change, but you must let go of the Republic before the Republic lets go of you. They never responded, and Dooku never wrote again. Dooku no longer wore his Jedi robes. They hung, folded, in a quiet room near the east wing of his estate, untouched but not forgotten. The symbols on their seams still held meaning, but that meaning no longer belonged to him. He did not destroy them. He simply walked past them, because the man he had become no longer needed to remember who he had once been. He was not a Jedi, not a Sith, not a warrior, not yet a conspirator, just a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. In the stillness of Sereno, Dooku found clarity, not peace, clarity, the kind that doesn't heal, but sharpens, the kind that strips away comfort and reveals what remains beneath the robes and titles. He had believed once, fiercely, completely, in the Jedi, in the Senate, in the idea that truth could rise through structure, that the Force would speak if the Order listened, that the galaxy could be healed from within. Now he knew better. The truth was no longer hidden. It had simply been ignored. He read the old archives again. The Sith had vanished, yes, but darkness had not. It had changed form, moved into new places, not temples or tombs but Senate halls, committee chambers, boardrooms where planets were bought and sold in silence. And the Jedi had become their mirror, clinging to routine, worshipping neutrality, choosing blindness over responsibility. Dooku could feel the shift coming. It wasn't a prophecy. It was pattern. A cycle repeating itself, just as it had across millennia. The light would falter. The balance would collapse. And from the ashes, something new would rise. But this time, Dooku did not look away. He studied Sith history not to fall, but to understand. He read their philosophies not to embrace darkness, but to recognize what the Jedi had refused to face. That passion did not always corrupt. That fear could sharpen truth. That attachment, in its truest form, was not weakness but the refusal to abandon what mattered. And in those thoughts, Dooku found a space the Jedi had never allowed him to enter. Possibility, not chaos, not evil. Simply the realization that balance could not be restored through denial. Something had to change. Something had to break. He began to attract visitors, scholars, nobles, disgraced senators. People who spoke in low voices about the Republic's decay, who questioned the Jedi's loyalty, who wondered aloud if peace was still possible without war. Dooku didn't lead them. Not yet. He listened, and in listening, he heard the voices of 100 systems, voices the Jedi never would have allowed him to hear. Voices not asking for power, but for clarity. Sereno became a shadow sanctuary, not for rebellion, but for reckoning. He kept his saber, though he rarely touched it. The weapon did not comfort him. What comforted him was knowing he would never again draw it for a cause he did not believe in. He meditated at sunrise, walked the gardens at dusk, wrote thoughts the council would have silenced. And as the stars spun slowly above his homeworld, he let go of the last illusion he had once clung to, that the Jedi would save the galaxy. They would not, because they no longer saw the galaxy for what it was. But Dooku did, and now, finally, his eyes were open. It began with a whisper. Not in the Force, not in a vision, in the galaxy itself. Dooku had spent months in quiet study on Sereno, watching the Republic fracture along lines no Jedi wanted to acknowledge. Corrupt senators rose to power without challenge. The courts bent to wealth. Corporate factions grew stronger than planetary governments. And every report he read confirmed what he already knew. The Republic was rotting from the inside. He sensed eyes on him long before the man revealed himself. A presence moving through the currents of politics, through rumors, through subtle motions of influence. Someone who understood the decay not as tragedy, but as opportunity. The moment finally came during a diplomatic summit on Sereno. Dooku attended out of obligation, standing in echoing halls filled with noble houses and off-world dignitaries. He felt the disturbance before he saw the man, a ripple of careful intent, of stillness disguised as politeness. Senator Palpatine, soft-spoken, unassuming, eyes gentle, posture humble. But beneath that modest exterior, Dooku sensed something he had not felt in years. Recognition. The senator greeted him with a bow deeper than expected. "Count Dooku," he said, voice calm and warm. "It is an honor to finally meet the man the Republic refuses to understand." Dooku studied him. Most senators do not seek out those who challenge the Republic. Palpatine's smile remained steady, perhaps because most senators fear truth more than failure. It was an answer no Jedi would have dared to speak. Their conversation drifted easily, not of war, not of power, but of the quiet fractures in the galaxy. Palpatine spoke with clarity Dooku had longed to hear from the Council. He understood the Senate's corruption, the Jedi's blindness, the slow collapse of order beneath the weight of bureaucracy. And he spoke not with anger, but with disappointment, almost sadness. "Peace," Palpatine said, "is not the natural state of a galaxy. It must be shaped, maintained, directed." Dooku felt something tighten in his chest. Directed by whom? By those with the strength to do what others will not. The words lingered in Dooku's mind long after the summit ended. Days passed, messages followed, private meetings, slow, deliberate discussions, never rushed, never aggressive. Palpatine did not push. He did not persuade. He simply offered perspective. Perspective the Jedi had denied Dooku his entire life. And then, one night, as a storm rolled across Sereno's sky, the truth stepped out from behind the curtain. Darth Sidious. He revealed himself not with a snarl or a blade, but with honesty. The same voice, the same calm, the same recognition as the senator, only stripped of its gentleness. "You already know what the Jedi refuse to see," Sidious said. "The Republic cannot be saved. and the order that serves it is doomed to fall with it. Dooku did not draw his saber. He did not flinch. Because deep in his bones, he agreed. Sidious stepped closer. The galaxy needs order, Count Dooku. It needs clarity. It needs someone unafraid to make decisions the Jedi fear. Dooku saw it clearly now, not seduction, not deception, but alignment, a mirror of everything he had observed, every fracture, every truth the Jedi had ignored. "Why me?" he asked quietly. Sidious answered without hesitation. "Because you are already what the Jedi fear, a man who sees." The storm outside cracked with thunder. Inside the darkened chamber, an old truth returned to Dooku, one he had felt as a child, as a Padawan, as a master, and finally as an exile. He did not belong to the Jedi. He never had. And as he stood before Darth Sidious, he realized something even more painful. No one had ever understood him. Until now. Dooku did not meet Sidious again for several weeks. Not because he feared the man, but because he feared his own clarity. Every conversation, every quiet revelation, had echoed inside him long after Sidious departed. And in that echo, Dooku found something he had not felt in years. Purpose. Not hope, not ambition. Purpose. The Jedi had taught him to surrender ambition, to silence discomfort, to accept the galaxy as it was. But Sidious taught him something the Order never dared to speak. That order required strength, and peace required control. They met again on a remote platform overlooking the lower valleys of Sereno. Sidious arrived without guards, without ceremony, without even a weapon visible beneath his robe. He didn't need one. Their conversation began with the galaxy, its fractures, its hypocrisy, its desperate need for intervention. But slowly, gently, Sidious turned the subject inward. "You feel the imbalance," he said. "You always have. That is why the Council feared you." Dooku didn't argue. Sidious continued, "You search for order. Not peace. Order. The one thing the Jedi abandoned when they surrendered their purpose to the Senate." Dooku looked toward the horizon, to the pale sky stretching over Sereno. The Order lost its will long before it lost its independence. Sidious nodded, because it lost its courage. The words struck deeper than Dooku expected. Courage. The Jedi spoke endlessly of discipline, serenity, patience, but courage was something they rarely lived. To them, courage meant endurance. To Sidious, it meant action. Real action. "Do you believe the Jedi can change?" Sidious asked. Dooku closed his eyes. He saw Yoda meditating through crises. He saw Mace labeling doubt as disobedience. He saw Qui-Gon standing alone before a council that never listened. "No," Dooku said softly. "They cannot." Sidious stepped beside him, their silhouettes framed by the fading light. "And the Republic?" "Already lost," Dooku murmured. Sidious smiled, not triumphantly, but knowingly. "Then you understand why action is required." It wasn't seduction. It wasn't manipulation. It was clarity. For years, Dooku had watched the galaxy fall apart, while the Jedi clung to rituals. He had begged them to see the danger. He had begged them to see the truth. But the Jedi refused to see anything beyond their own dogma. Sidious offered something different. Not freedom, direction. Not power, purpose. "The Sith seek control," Dooku said quietly, testing the words on his tongue. Sidious responded without hesitation. "The Sith seek stability and dominance, only when necessary." Dooku considered that the Sith Code had always been framed as a call to chaos, passion, strength, victory. But Sidious spoke of it differently, not as a path to destruction, but as a structure, a system of clarity, a doctrine of action. The Jedi say the Sith destroy, Dooku said. Sidious looked out over the valley. The Jedi also say the Republic is strong. Both statements are false. The truth settled like ash. Dooku felt no fear, only acceptance. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Sidious turned to him slowly. "Not fall. Walk. Walk towards the future the Jedi are too afraid to face. Walk toward the order the galaxy requires." The wind shifted, cold and sharp, carrying the first hint of night. "You have the vision," Sidious whispered. "You have the will. All you lack is the legitimacy to reshape what must be rebuilt. And you can give me that?" Dooku asked. Sidious did not smile this time. He bowed his head, a gesture of respect. "No, you can take it." In that moment, Dooku understood. He was not being invited into darkness. He was being invited into purpose. Order over chaos. Strength over decay. Truth over tradition. And for the first time, the path ahead did not frighten him. It called to him. There was no ritual, no temple, no altar, no thunder in the sky. Just two men in a silent room beneath the towers of Sereno, one offering purpose, the other accepting it without resistance. Sidious did not crown him. He named him Tyrannus. The word carried no fire, no prophecy, no false promises. It was not a mask. It was a mirror. Dooku repeated it once, not aloud, but within. The sound of it stirred something ancient in him, not darkness, but definition. A clarity that had evaded him his entire life. Tyrannus was not who he became. It was who he had always been, waiting beneath obedience. The Jedi had taught him that identity was the enemy of peace, that the self must dissolve in service to the code. But now, Dooku saw the lie. The Jedi had not erased the self. They had buried it. And in that burial, they had created 1,000 silent fractures. He had carried those fractures since childhood, every unanswered question, every contradiction in their laws, every moment they had asked him to ignore what he saw. Tyrannus did not ignore. Tyrannus did not ask for permission. He accepted what Dooku had always feared. That truth is not democratic. It is decisive. He did not feel the dark side consume him. He did not fall. He did not burn. The Force still moved through him, clear and sharp, but it no longer whispered serenity. It whispered action. Sidious explained the role he would play not as servant, but as architect. The Republic needed to collapse. The Jedi needed to break. But that collapse would not happen through brute force. It would happen through control. Tyrannus would become the instrument of that control. Quietly, strategically, with the same discipline the Jedi had once admired in him now turned toward their undoing. He would select clones. He would fund a war. He would forge an army for a conflict not yet written. And no one would know, because the galaxy still trusted the man named Dooku. That trust would become a weapon. And in wielding it, Tyrannus would shape the future the Jedi refused to prepare for. There was no joy in the transformation, no celebration, only silence, the same silence he had felt when the Jedi let him leave. Only now, he understood why it had never truly left him. Because he had been walking toward this moment his entire life. Every fracture, every exile, every truth denied. The Jedi had broken him piece by piece. And now, those pieces had come together under a different name. Tyrannus. He still walked Sereno's halls, still met with noble families, still spoke with Jedi when they passed through the sector. But something in him had vanished. Not his morals, not his values, not even his belief in peace. Only the need to be understood. Tyrannus no longer sought approval, no longer ached for the council to listen, no longer needed anyone to follow him, because those who stood in his way would be shaped by the future he had already begun to construct. And those who could not be shaped would be removed. He returned to the shadows willingly, not to hide, to prepare. He would be many things in the years to come: a warlord, a separatist, a traitor in the eyes of the Jedi. But beneath every title, one truth remained. He had not changed. He had simply removed the mask the Jedi had given him. And in doing so, he became what they feared most: a man who could see. Dooku did not disappear overnight. He faded. Not from the galaxy, from himself. From the man he had been. From the ideals he once clung to with trembling hands. He still walked among senators, still attended diplomatic gatherings, still spoke with the same elegant posture that once defined a Jedi Master. But behind his eyes, the shift was complete. His thoughts no longer belonged to the Order. His purpose no longer belonged to the Republic. He watched them all with quiet detachment. The Jedi, standing tall in their robes, unaware that the ground beneath them was crumbling. The Senate, drowning in its own comfort, unaware that the waves were already rising. The corporations, growing bold, unaware that they were being positioned as pieces on a board only two men could see. Dooku spoke politely. Tyrannus listened. The duality did not tear him apart. It stabilized him. The Jedi had asked him to erase emotion. Sidious asked him to erase hesitation. The difference was subtle, but it was everything. Tyrannus learned to move through political circles without revealing a single intention. He used his noble blood to build influence. He used his Jedi past to inspire trust. And he used his clarity the Jedi had called dangerous, to shape connections that would one day make war inevitable. But he did not feel like a villain. He felt like a surgeon, removing infection, preparing the galaxy for the amputation it refused to accept. At night, he walked the quiet halls of his estate. The same halls that once felt empty now felt purposeful. Each shadow reminded him of a decision he had made. Each echo reminded him of a truth he had embraced. He no longer questioned his path. The questioning had ended the day he left the Jedi Temple. But one memory lingered, the only one that still had the power to soften him. Qui-Gon. There were moments when he wondered what his former Padawan would think of the man he had become. Whether Qui-Gon would grieve, whether he would understand, whether he would try to stop him. But then he remembered the council, how they had ignored Qui-Gon's warnings just as they had ignored his. How they had silenced the one Jedi they should have heard. And he knew the truth. If Qui-Gon still lived, he might have walked down a path that made them enemies. Not because Tyrannus wished it, but because Qui-Gon still believed in a light that no longer existed. Tyrannus did not hate the Jedi. He mourned them. He mourned what they could have been, what they refused to see, what their blindness would cost them. But he would not save them. His allegiance now was to something colder and clearer, a future shaped, not discovered. A future in which chaos would be replaced by control. A future in which the Force would no longer be interpreted through endless debates and half-blind rituals. A future crafted by intention, by order, by necessity. He still held his lightsaber at times, turning it slowly in his hands. The hilt felt familiar, but distant, like a relic from someone else's life. He kept it not out of respect for the Jedi, but out of acknowledgement of the man they once tried to shape. A man who no longer existed. Tyrannus did not celebrate that death. He accepted it. In the final quiet moments before dawn, he stood on the balcony of his estate, watching the sky shift from black to gray, light creeping forward but never fast enough to conquer the night. It reminded him of the Jedi, always present, never decisive, and somewhere beyond that horizon, Darth Sidious waited, patient, calculating, certain. Together, they would reshape the galaxy, not through hatred, not through passion, through clarity, through purpose, through the erasure of everything Dooku once was. And as the last trace of night faded, one truth settled fully into place. Count Dooku of Serenno was gone. Only Tyrannus remained. When Dooku reappeared, he wore no armor, no mask, no threat. He stood on Raxus Prime, draped in noble robes, his voice echoing across 1,000 systems through polished holoprojectors. The message was simple. The Republic had failed. He spoke not as a Sith, not even as a warrior. He spoke as a former Jedi Master, a Count of Serenno, a man the galaxy had once trusted to protect the peace. And now, he claimed the Republic was no longer worthy of that peace. They called it treason. He called it truth. Dooku knew the power of symbols. He did not scream rebellion. He did not promise war. He promised dignity, sovereignty, a return to values the Republic had long abandoned. And the Outer Rim listened. Thousands of systems answered his call. Sectors that had been taxed into ruin. Colonies left undefended. Worlds ignored by the core. They rallied beneath his words not because they craved chaos, but because they believed no one else was willing to speak. Dooku gave them that voice. But it wasn't his. It belonged to Sidious. The Confederacy of Independent Systems was not born from revolution. It was built in a boardroom, crafted by Sith hands, shaped by Sith patience, and Dooku was its public face. He gave interviews, held forums, negotiated with guilds, every step measured, every phrase rehearsed. The image of a noble defector, calm, rational, principled. A man the Jedi could not discredit without confirming their own decay. And yet, behind that calm, he orchestrated chaos. With each speech, he drove another wedge between systems. With each alliance, he locked another sector into conflict. The banking clans were promised leverage. The Trade Federation was promised control. The Techno Union was promised protection. But none were promised peace. Because peace was never the goal. Dooku had helped design the war not to win it, but to shape it, to ignite it in a way that would force both sides into collapse. The Republic would exhaust itself. The Jedi would scatter. The Republic's enemies would fall into place. And when the war was done, someone new would rise. Sidious called it restructuring. Dooku still called it order. But sometimes, late at night, when the holo-transmissions stopped and the lights dimmed across the War Council chambers, Dooku would stare at his own reflection and wonder. Was he leading a movement? Or was he managing a performance? The Jedi had trained him to seek truth. Now he crafted illusion. He still moved with grace, still spoke with eloquence, but beneath his words lived a growing weight, the burden of a lie too vast to untangle. He told himself it was necessary, that the cause was just, that the ends would one day reveal the purpose. But part of him already knew. He was not leading a revolution. He was conducting a tragedy. Geonosis became the turning point. A spark struck in dry kindling. Jedi sent to negotiate. Droids deployed in secret. A battle that was never meant to be avoided. It was meant to begin everything. And Dooku stood at its center, watching as the Jedi charged into fire, as clones descended from the stars, as chaos bloomed across the sand. The war had begun, and no one realized the man who started it had already chosen how it would end. The droid armies did not appear overnight. They were planned, calculated, engineered with the same precision Dooku once applied to peace. Factories on Geonosis roared day and night, pouring metal into ranks of B-1 battle droids weak alone, terrifying in number. The Techno-Union contributed stronger models. The banking clan funded fleets. The corporate alliance offered transports and artillery. Every guild wanted influence. Every faction wanted leverage. Every leader believed they were joining a cause that would reshape the galaxy in their favor. And Dooku let them believe it. He stood in assembly halls, filled with executives and warlords, his voice steady, his tone patient, presenting the conflict as an act of liberation. In truth, it was an act of design. The Separatist army would never defeat the Republic. It wasn't built to. It was built to sustain a war long enough to break everything else. Dooku inspected the factories personally. He walked through the corridors of Geonosis, surrounded by towering machinery, sparks raining like falling stars. Lines of unfinished droids stared blankly as he passed, their metal skulls reflecting the amber light. They would become soldiers, tools, expendable bodies to fight a war no one was meant to win. And Dooku felt no pride. He simply felt the weight of necessity. He negotiated treaties with planetary leaders, worlds like Umbara, Kali, and Ando. Some joined out of fear, others out of anger, others because they no longer trusted a Senate that had forgotten them. Dooku listened to their pleas. He spoke gently. He promised autonomy, but deep down, he knew the outcome of every agreement. These worlds would suffer. They would send their best into battle. They would lose cities, lose children, lose everything they hoped to protect. They believed Dooku fought for them. But he fought for a vision far beyond any individual world. A vision Sidious had planted, but Dooku had watered. He watched as battle plans were drafted, as star maps were marked with targets, as generals programmed droid strategies without ever asking why the war seemed designed to escalate rather than end. No one questioned it. Because conflict had momentum, and Dooku had given it direction. Still, in the quiet moments between councils, he allowed doubt to whisper. He remembered Jedi teachings about life, about balance, about the value of every being. But those teachings now felt small, fragile, unprepared for the galaxy that truly existed. This war would reset everything. The old structures would fall. The weak foundations would crack. The future would rise from the rubble. That was the purpose. At least, that was what he told himself. One evening, on a balcony overlooking the factories, Dooku witnessed the first rollout of the new super battle droids. Their heavy forms marched in perfect synchrony, metal feet pounding the floor with a rhythm that echoed through the complex. Poggle the Lesser beamed with pride. Dooku only nodded. These machines had no fear, no hesitation, no conscience. Perfect weapons for a war designed to be endless. Later, alone in his chambers, Dooku activated a private holoprojector. Sidious appeared in flickering red. His voice was calm, pleased. "You have done well, Lord Tyrannus." Dooku lowered his head. "The alliances hold. The factories remain loyal." "The war is ready," Sidious said. "Soon the Jedi will be forced to fight." Dooku hesitated for a moment so small even Sidious might have missed it. "And they will lose," Dooku said softly. Sidious smiled. Not kindly, knowingly. The transmission faded, leaving Dooku in darkness. The droids continued to march below, their footsteps echoing through the night. An army built for a war no one questioned. A war no one understood. A war that would break the galaxy, on purpose. And Dooku stood above it all. The architect, the builder, the betrayer, and still, somewhere buried beneath the steel and shadows, a part of him whispered hope. It began on Geonosis. Not with a declaration, not with a fleet, but with blades. Dooku stood in the shadows as Jedi Masters and Knights stormed the arena, outnumbered, outgunned, already too late. He watched the chaos unfold, eyes unblinking as friends from a life he had left behind fell to the weapons he had helped create. He did not flinch. Because this was not betrayal. It was execution. The beginning of a plan shaped in silence, carried on lies, and now revealed in blood. The Jedi believed they were stopping a war. They didn't know they were walking into it. When the clone army descended from the sky shining, obedient, precise, Dooku understood the full scope of Sidious's design. It wasn't just that the Republic had an army now. It was that the Jedi would lead it. That was the genius. Dooku had helped create both sides. And now he would destroy them, together. The battles spread quickly, across Kamino, Ryloth, Christophs, Mon Calamari. Each world fell into the rhythm of war, a rhythm that never slowed. And through it all, Dooku commanded. He issued orders to the droid generals, deployed fleets to bait Republic responses, allowed victories and defeats to shift like a tide, not in favor of one side or the other, but in favor of chaos. Because chaos was control. The Jedi thought they were protecting peace. The clones thought they were fighting evil. But both were weapons. Both were marching toward exhaustion, toward disillusionment, toward collapse. Dooku watched them closely. Not with hatred, with disappointment. The Jedi were blind. They debated tactics, casualties, supply lines, but none questioned the deeper wound. None stopped to ask why the war had no center, why it spiraled endlessly, why each victory felt hollow. Dooku saw it clearly, because he had helped build it. And yet, somewhere in the swirl of battles, he began to feel the lie press against him. Not because the war was wrong, but because it no longer felt like it belonged to him. More and more, Sidious took control. More commands came from the dark. More movements felt like secrets even Dooku didn't understand. New pawns emerged: General Grievous, twisted and cruel. Asajj Ventress, Dooku's own chosen assassin, crafted from rage and abandonment. He trained her not as a Sith, but as a warning, to test the Jedi, to punish them, to remind them what they could never defeat. But Dooku saw what Sidious was doing. He was building chaos within chaos. He was giving Dooku power, and stripping it away. The war was no longer a tool. It was a stage, and Dooku, once its architect, had become part of its performance. He still played his role commanding armies, delivering speeches, executing strategy with brutal clarity. But something inside him began to fracture. He had once believed this war would cleanse the galaxy. Now he began to suspect it would only break it. And when that thought truly took hold, he found himself alone again. Just as he had been in the temple, just as he had been on Serenno, just as he would always be beneath the name Tyrannus. He watched the Jedi fall by the hundreds, watched clones die by the thousands, and he asked a question he had once buried beneath strategy and rhetoric. If no one deserves to win, why fight at all? The war stretched on, longer than any strategist had predicted, longer than any senator had imagined, longer than any citizen could endure. Entire sectors burned. Routes once safe were now graveyards of drifting ships. And still, Dooku stood at the center of it all, raising armies, giving commands, and shaping battles with the precision of a man conducting an orchestra he no longer wished to hear. He had become the face of the separatists, the enemy of the Republic, the traitor of the Jedi Order. But behind every accusation, behind every broadcast, behind every flame ignited by the conflict, one truth remained buried deep in him. He still hoped. Hope was the weakness he never killed. Hope was the wound that never closed. Even as systems fell and Jedi died, there was a part of Dooku, a quiet, stubborn part that believed Sidious truly intended to rebuild the galaxy. Not with chaos, but with order. Not with tyranny, but with clarity. He believed the Republic could be replaced by something stronger. Something honest. Something uncorrupted by greed and complacency. That hope flickered like a distant star. Sometimes faint, sometimes bright. Never fully extinguished. He carried it into every meeting, every council, every negotiation with separatist leaders who were louder than wise, desperate rather than disciplined. They thought they were building freedom. They thought they were fighting for justice. Dooku never corrected them, because their dream resembled his own, just through a different lens. And though he no longer believed in the Jedi, he still believed in the ideal they had forgotten: balance, peace, a galaxy that did not drift into ruin under the weight of the Senate's corruption. It was easy to tell himself the war was a bridge toward that future. But reality chipped away at that illusion, little by little. It happened in small moments. A village bombed by droids he had deployed. A young clone, barely trained, collapsing in the dirt. A separatist world he promised protection, left burning after a strategic withdrawal. Each event was a reminder. He was not healing the galaxy. He was opening its wounds wider. One night, he walked alone through the war room of his flagship. The holomaps glowed dim blue across his face, showing fronts stretching across half the galaxy. Red lines, blue lines, flashes of combat. Markers of loss. No pattern. No progress. Just spirals of destruction repeated again and again. He placed a hand on the console, feeling the warmth beneath his palm, and closed his eyes. The war had become a storm with no center, a storm he once believed he commanded, a storm he now realized he only served. And yet, when he thought of Sidious, hope still stirred. Perhaps Sidious saw further than he did. Perhaps this suffering was necessary. Perhaps the galaxy had to be broken before it could be rebuilt. He clung to that belief, not because it felt right, but because the alternative felt unbearable. If Sidious was lying, if this war was nothing more than ambition, if the galaxy was bleeding for nothing, then Dooku had damned everything he ever loved. He opened his eyes. The holomap flickered. A dozen systems blinked red. A dozen more trembled on the edge. He whispered, almost to himself, "Let there be purpose in this." But the maps gave no answer. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted past, cold, distant, indifferent. Dooku straightened his spine, settling back into the posture of a leader, a general, a Sith Lord, a man who could not afford doubt. Because if he stopped believing, the entire war would collapse into truth, a truth he was not ready to face. So he carried the last spark of hope he should have killed long ago. He carried it into battle. He carried it into strategy. He carried it into lies. And in doing so, he carried it toward the end he could not yet see. Asajj Ventress did not enter Dooku's life as an apprentice. She entered as a question. A silent, sharp-edged question born from a childhood carved by violence. She was a survivor of rat attack, a world where war was not an event but a climate constant, choking, endless. She fought because she had to. She killed because she would have died otherwise. And when the Jedi Knight Kai-Narek found her, he mistook that desperation for potential. For a brief moment, she believed in light. But the galaxy does not nurture fragile things. It breaks them. When Kai-Narek fell, Ventress did not mourn. She hardened. The force within her twisted into something sharp, something lonely, something hungry. She became a weapon in search of a wielder. Dooku recognized that hunger the moment he saw her. During the dark gatherings on Raxus, when separatist leaders assembled under flickering torchlight, Ventress stepped forward from the shadows, bold, fearless, determined to prove herself. She bowed in the presence of the Count, not out of respect, but out of expectation. She believed he could shape her. He believed she could be shaped. Dooku tested her without warning. A swift strike, a sudden burst of lightning. She blocked the first. She absorbed the second. And in her defiance, he saw a reflection of his own forgotten fire, the part of him that the Jedi had tried to bury. He did not praise her. Praise was a Jedi habit. Instead, he offered something far more dangerous. Purpose. Ventress accepted, not realizing what it meant. He trained her ruthlessly. Long hours in private arenas, where the air smelled of scorched stone and the sound of clashing sabers echoed like distant thunder. Dooku pushed her past exhaustion, past fear, past the limits she had built around her grief. He did not teach her serenity. He taught her survival. He did not teach her restraint. He taught her precision. Every lesson was a reminder. She was not being shaped into a Jedi. She was being reforged into a blade sharp enough to pierce the armor of the Order he once served. Ventress thrived under the cruelty. It gave structure to her rage. It turned her pain into direction. Dooku watched her grow, watched her power settle into a cold, controlled intensity. She fought with elegance, but without hesitation. Her strikes carried the weight of someone who had lost everything and refused to lose again. And Dooku approved. She was not a Sith, but she was close enough. He sent her on missions the droid armies could never complete: assassinations, infiltrations, tests designed to fracture Jedi confidence. Each success pulled her deeper into the web he and Sidious had created. Each failure hardened her further. But the more Dooku shaped her, the more he sensed something dangerous within her. Loyalty. Not loyalty to the Sith. Not loyalty to Sidious, loyalty to him. It was a bond the Sith did not tolerate. A master who inspired devotion threatened the hierarchy. And Ventress, for the first time in her life, had found someone who did not see her as an orphan, a victim, or a leftover from a forgotten war. She saw Dooku as the only constant she had ever known. That affection was a danger Sidious would never allow. But for a brief moment, a moment that now lies buried beneath years of betrayal, Dooku allowed himself to believe she could be different from the others, that she could be shaped into a true heir. A partner in the shadows, a blade he could trust in a galaxy built on deception. He never voiced this hope. Sith Lords do not speak what they fear losing. He simply continued the lessons, continued the shaping, continued the lie, unaware that every truth he carved into her would one day return to carve through him. Ventress grew quickly, far faster than Dooku had expected, and far more fiercely than Sidious had intended. What began as raw, directionless anger became sharp, refined power under Dooku's hand. She mastered dual blades with a ferocity unmatched by separatist generals. She slipped into battles like a shadow, striking with precision, retreating with intent. Every mission she completed added to the myth that the Republic feared but could not explain. To Dooku, she was not just effective, she was reliable, and reliability was the first step toward danger. He saw her confidence grow, saw her take command of units, saw her intimidate allies and terrify enemies. She fought with a passion Dooku himself had forgotten how to feel, a hunger he had trained out of himself long before he took the name Tyrannus. She was what he might have become had he embraced emotion instead of burying it. The Jedi sensed her rising presence. They whispered her name through council chambers, uncertain where she had come from or why her power felt familiar. Some believed she was a fallen Jedi. Others believed she was Dooku's secret apprentice. The council debated, argued, and doubted all, while Ventress continued to grow. But Sidious did not doubt. He understood exactly what Ventress was becoming. A threat, not to the Jedi, to the Sith. One night, Dooku received a transmission, cold, unyielding, final. Sidious's hologram flickered to life, casting the room in a harsh red glow. "She grows strong," Sidious said. Dooku inclined his head. "Her strength serves us." "Her strength serves her," Sidious corrected, voice smooth as a blade. "And you have allowed it." Dooku felt the words like a weight on his chest. "I have shaped her according to your will, my master. You have shaped her beyond it." There was a pause long enough to cut the room in half. "Kill her," Sidious said. Dooku did not argue. He did not hesitate. Sith loyalty allowed no room for attachment, no matter how deeply buried. He bowed his head and ended the transmission. But when the hologram faded, a silence filled the room, unlike any he had felt before. It was the silence of loss, before the loss had even occurred. Ventress arrived moments later, summoned by a message she did not question. She bowed, unaware of the oath that had just been spoken above her fate. Dooku studied her, the confidence in her stance, the trust in her eyes, the loyalty she carried without words. She had been abandoned her whole life, first by her people, then by her master, then by the Jedi who ignored her existence. Now she would be abandoned again. But this time, by him. For a fraction of a second, Dooku felt something close to regret. But Sith regret is a dying star, brief, cold, and gone before it can warm anything. He struck without warning. Lightning tore across the room, throwing Ventress backward. She hit the stone floor with a cry she tried to swallow. Dooku advanced, sabers igniting, the light painting the chamber with violent colors. Ventress rose, blades humming, betrayal burning in her eyes. "Master, why?" she whispered. Dooku did not answer, because there was no answer she could bear. They clashed with a fury that cracked the walls. Sparks rained like falling embers. Ventress fought harder than she ever had, driven not by rage but by heartbreak. She was not fighting the Sith. She was fighting the one person she believed would never throw her away. But even heartbreak has limits, and Dooku had Sidious's will behind him. Ventress fell, but she did not die. Survival was the first lesson he had ever taught her, and it was the one she used to escape him. When the smoke settled, Dooku stood alone, breathing slowly, sabers dimming, the scar of his betrayal fresh in the air. He felt no victory, only the knowledge that he had destroyed the only apprentice who had ever looked at him with something other than fear. And in doing so, he had destroyed a part of himself. After Ventress escaped, the silence that followed her absence clung to Dooku like a shadow he could not shake. She had been many things: a weapon, a student, a reflection, and now she was a threat he had created with his own hand. Sidious demanded stability, the Separatists demanded strength, and Dooku, stripped of the apprentice who once stood at his side, needed a replacement. He did not search for one. One was delivered to him. Savage Opress, a towering warrior from Dathomir, raised by the Night Brothers, reshaped by Night Sister magic into something far beyond mortal form. Ventress had presented him as a gift, but gifts from the Night Sisters were never gifts. They were traps. Still, Dooku accepted Savage. What choice did he have? The war continued. The pressure rose. Sidious watched. Dooku needed a blade, and Savage was a blade carved from brutality itself. Savage bowed before him the night he arrived, not out of respect, but because the Night Sister spell forced him to. His eyes glowed with unnatural fire. His muscles trembled with power barely contained. He was a storm wearing the shape of a man. Dooku knew immediately that he could not be trained the way he trained Ventress. Savage was not subtle. Savage was not patient. Savage was destruction given purpose. So Dooku changed his methods. He taught Savage to channel his raw strength into controlled bursts. He drilled him in lightsaber discipline, though the weapon seemed almost too delicate in the warrior's massive hands. He guided him through simple force techniques, each one amplified by the monstrous magic that pulsed in his veins. But there was something missing. Not talent, not willingness. Connection. Savage did not look at Dooku with loyalty. He did not look at him with fear. He looked at him with confusion, a creature forged into obedience, unsure why he existed beyond the orders he was given. Dooku issued commands. Savage obeyed. But obedience without understanding is brittle. When Dooku pushed him, Savage pushed back. Not intentionally, simply because he was built to break whatever stood in his way. Missions that required finesse ended in carnage. Operations meant to intimidate ended in slaughter. He overwhelmed every battlefield, but he drowned subtlety in the process. Dooku found himself speaking more sternly, using more pain, relying more heavily on punishment. He was not shaping Savage. He was containing him, and containment was impossible. Meanwhile, the Night Sisters watched. Ventress watched. Their revenge unfolded quietly, unseen. They had given Dooku a weapon designed not just to serve him, but to destroy him when the time came. That time arrived sooner than he expected. One night, as Dooku meditated within his chambers, Savage entered not with deference, but with fury boiling behind his eyes. The Night Sisters had broken the spell. They had unleashed the mind they had caged. Savage roared accusations, his voice shaking the very air. "You used me." It was not a question. It was a truth. Dooku rose slowly, his face calm, though he felt the shift like a knife pressed to his spine. "You were trained for power," Dooku said. "And now I claim it," Savage answered. He attacked with the force of a collapsing star. Dooku met him with lightning that cracked through the room, but Savage endured it, pushing forward, smashing through pillars, ripping apart anything in his path. The entire chamber became a battleground of shattered stone and flickering shadows. Dooku fought with precision. Savage fought with rage. In the chaos, Dooku realized the truth. Savage was never an apprentice. He was a consequence of betrayal, a consequence of arrogance, a consequence of believing he could shape weapons without them turning on him. When Ventress appeared to join the attack, the trap was complete. Two monsters, one created by loss, one created by magic, converged on the Master who had underestimated both. Dooku escaped only through sheer discipline and the sharp instincts of a man who had survived too many wars. But survival did not erase what had been revealed. He had lost control. He had lost his creations. He had lost the illusion that he commanded the dark. Savage Opress had shown him the truth. A master who tries to build power from broken lives eventually stands before the ruins he made. When the echoes of Savage's rage faded, and the shadows of Ventress slipped back into the night, Dooku was left alone in the quiet that follows survival. It was not victory, it was not relief. It was the sound of something inside him, cracking the quiet recognition that he had become a master surrounded by the ghosts of his own failures. Ventress was gone. Savage had turned on him. The Night Sisters had mocked him. And Dooku felt it, the slow unraveling of a truth he had ignored for too long. He could not keep an apprentice. Not because he lacked power, but because he lacked trust. Trust had been stripped from him, piece by piece, ever since the Jedi Council taught him that obedience mattered more than truth. Ever since the Republic taught him that peace was only a word they used when it benefited them. Ever since Sidious taught him that loyalty was a tool sharp, beautiful, and meant to be discarded. And without trust, every apprentice he took was doomed. He did not admit this. Sith do not confess weakness. But on the nights when the war rooms fell silent and the lights dimmed on his flagship, Dooku walked the empty corridors without a sound. His boots echoed off metal floors. His cloak dragged gently behind him. And the weight of absence followed him like a second shadow. He had tried to raise apprentices the way the Jedi had taught him, with testing, with discipline, with purpose. But he had shaped them the way the Sith required, with pain, with fear, with hollow promises of power. And that combination was poison. Ventress had wanted belonging. Savage had wanted clarity. Dooku had given them neither. Instead, he had given them reasons to break. Reports of their movements trickled in a trail of violence, rebellion, and shattered alliances. Ventress hunted him with the focused hatred of a survivor. Savage hunted the galaxy with the wild instinct of a weapon finally freed from its sheath. Each encounter they survived without him strengthened the truth. They no longer needed a master. And Dooku no longer knew how to be one. Still, the galaxy demanded he try again. The war stretched on. Sidious watched from the shadows, expecting results, expecting obedience, expecting Dooku to remain strong even as the foundation under him trembled. So, Dooku sought new tools, not apprentices, but creations. Experiments in bioengineering, modified soldiers, force-sensitive prototypes grown in vats, droids enhanced with forbidden knowledge. None of them worked. The Force resisted him. Every attempt collapsed under instability or madness, or the simple truth that life shaped by fear cannot grow. It breaks, it turns inward, it consumes itself. Dooku destroyed the evidence each time. He did not report failure to Sidious. Some truths were too dangerous even for a Sith Lord to admit. He was no longer building students. He was hiding mistakes. And in the middle of that growing darkness, a thought began to take form, quiet, fragile, unspeakable. What if Sidious no longer needed him? What if he, like Ventress, like Savage, like the very war he orchestrated, was becoming another tool reaching the end of its usefulness? Dooku felt the shift in subtle ways. Sidious contacted him less often. Orders arrived through intermediaries. Decisions were made without him. A cold realization settled in his bones. He had joined the Sith, believing he would reshape the galaxy. Now he was struggling to remain part of the plan at all. He walked through the shadowed halls of his flagship, stopping at a viewport where the stars drifted by in silent rivers of light. His reflection stared back at him, older, harder, a man carved by choices he could no longer undo. He had no apprentice, no heir, no legacy. Only a war he had built but did not control. Only a master he served but did not trust. Only a future he shaped but could not see. Dooku closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt truly alone. Not as a warrior, not as a Sith, as a master without students, a man who had spent his life teaching, only to discover that everything he taught had turned against him. And somewhere deep within, beneath the layers of power and pride and scar tissue, he wondered if this was the destiny he had never escaped, to stand in the darkness he created, surrounded by ruins that once had names. He was supposed to return in victory, not in chains. Dooku had stood at the edge of the war he designed and watched the final pieces begin to move. The Republic had been weakened, the Jedi were spread thin. The people cried out for order, for strength. And now, Darth Sidious had given him one final task. Stage a kidnapping. Let himself be captured. Draw Skywalker in. Test him. That was the plan, or at least, that was what Sidious had told him. Dooku knew the Chancellor's rescue would be carefully orchestrated, every angle arranged, every action pre-calculated. This wasn't war. It was theater, a show of chaos designed to birth control. Dooku had played this game before, played it well, but something felt different. He stood aboard the invisible hand, Grievous commanding the assault with mechanical glee, and Dooku quietly observed the unfolding events like a man staring at his own reflection across shattered glass. The Force had grown silent, not hostile, not cold, just quiet, as if it were holding its breath. That silence unsettled him more than any Republic fleet. For all his cynicism, Dooku believed in the Force, believed in its gravity, its will. Even in darkness, it had guided him softly, subtly. Now, it whispered nothing. And in its place was an emptiness he couldn't name. He stood in the darkened bridge chamber as the battle outside grew louder. The Separatist fleet fired blindly, clone ships answered with precision. And deep in the belly of the cruiser, the Chancellor waited to be found. Dooku checked his lightsaber. He had fought many battles, faced Jedi Masters, slaughtered traitors, outwitted politicians. But now he felt unease coil in his stomach like something ancient waking from sleep. Skywalker was coming. And not as a child, not as a Padawan, but as something else, something unfinished, something forged in war and buried grief. Dooku had watched Anakin from afar for years, Sidious's chosen future, the Jedi's broken prodigy, powerful, reckless, righteous. Dooku saw the raw fire in him, but he never feared it. Until now. As the turbolift neared the observation deck, Dooku stood alone beside the Chancellor's suspended chair, watching the blast doors glow red from approaching sabers. He was ready. He told himself that. This was part of the plan. Defeat Kenobi. Push Skywalker to his limits. Let the dark side rise. Show Sidious that the boy was finally ready to be turned. Then step aside. Dooku would disappear, go into exile, watch the new empire rise from afar, no longer a warrior, but a witness. It sounded clean, logical, but the Force still said nothing. And in the silence, Dooku realized what he had refused to believe. He would not be stepping aside. He would not be disappearing. He was not part of the future. He was part of the ritual. The doors exploded inward. Obi-Wan entered first, lightsaber drawn, calm and sharp like always. Skywalker followed, taller now, armored in black leather, his expression unreadable. Dooku bowed his head slightly. The final game was beginning. He ignited his saber. Blue and green blades snapped into light. Dooku struck first, not to kill, but to control the flow. He moved like a dancer, precise and powerful, testing Kenobi, studying Skywalker. He had fought them before. He knew their rhythms, their limitations. But Skywalker didn't hesitate. He pressed forward, harder, faster. His strikes came in waves, fueled not by anger, but something deeper, a storm that had found direction. Dooku faltered, only for a breath. But it was enough. The duel turned. Kenobi was separated. Skywalker drove forward. And Dooku saw it. This wasn't a test. It was an execution. The moment Skywalker's saber met his own, Dooku felt something he had not felt in decades. Fear. Not of death, he had long accepted the risk of serving the Sith. Not of failure, he understood defeat as part of strategy. This fear was different. Quiet, shaped like recognition. Skywalker was no longer fighting like a Jedi. Their blades clashed again and again, sparks lighting the dim chamber, the hum of the engines trembling through the floor. Kenobi attempted to intervene, but Dooku separated them with a controlled kick, sending the Jedi Master tumbling down the steps. Now, it was just the two of them. Skywalker pressed forward with a ferocity bordering on desperation. His movements lacked refinement, but they carried a weight Dooku could not match. Each strike landed with the force of a lifetime of buried pain. Dooku parried, pivoted, and redirected, his technique flawless, polished through decades of war and training. But Anakin fought like someone who had nothing left to lose. Their sabers locked, blue against red. The light between them flickered across their faces, one calm, one wild. "You've grown," Dooku said, voice steady, though his arm trembled beneath the pressure. "And you're slower," Anakin replied. Dooku's jaw tightened. He broke the lock and retreated, leaping onto the platform steps for higher ground. It was a tactical choice, a position of advantage. He expected Skywalker to slow down, to recalculate. He didn't. Anakin followed instantly, launching upward with a force leap that shattered the steps beneath him. Dooku blocked, barely absorbing the blow. His bones shook with the impact. He shifted strategies, drawing on the Force, hurling debris toward Anakin in wide, powerful arcs. Anakin sliced through each piece as though they were feathers. Dooku tried lightning a burst sharp enough to kill a lesser warrior, but Skywalker caught it on his blade, face twisted with something almost like fury. A flicker of doubt formed in Dooku's mind. Why is he holding back? Why is this anger controlled? Who taught him this balance? Dooku didn't know the answer. Not yet. But he felt the truth forming. This was not Skywalker fighting. This was Sidious's will, moving through him. Kenobi attempted to rise again, wounded but determined. Dooku pushed him aside with the Force, sending him unconscious to the floor, a necessary choice. But when Dooku turned back, Skywalker was already upon him. Their blades clashed in a storm of light. Dooku's foot slipped. The shift was small, a moment measured in heartbeats, but it opened a crack in his defenses. Anakin exploited it immediately, bringing his saber down with such force that Dooku's left-hand blade flew from his grasp, skidding across the floor. Dooku stepped back, breath sharp. Skywalker didn't relent. With a final surge deeper, darker, more decisive than anything Dooku had ever anticipated, Skywalker struck again. The impact sent Dooku crashing to his knees, his remaining blade skittering uselessly out of reach. Anakin's saber hovered inches from his throat. Dooku stared up at him. For the first time, he saw Anakin clearly, not the reckless boy, not the unstable Padawan, but the weapon Sidious had been forging behind the scenes. A weapon meant to replace him. Dooku's heart pounded, not with panic, but with realization. He had not been brought here to win. He had not been brought here to teach. He had been brought here to die. Before he could speak, Sidious's voice rang through the chamber, warm, gentle, poisonous. "Good, Anakin. Good." Dooku's eyes widened. The trap was complete. Skywalker lifted his saber, and Dooku understood the truth. He was kneeling before the future, and the future did not include him. Dooku knelt in silence, breath trembling in his chest, the hum of Skywalker's blade vibrating softly against the air near his throat. The chamber felt colder now, as if the ship itself understood the moment, as if metal and shadow could sense a life reaching its final truth. He did not plead. He did not shout. He did not look away. He had been defeated before, but never like this. Sidious descended the steps with slow, measured confidence, his voice dripping with sympathy that felt like venom. "Anakin," he said gently, "he is too dangerous to be kept alive." Dooku's eyelids twitched. The words pierced deeper than the blade. Because he knew them. He had spoken them. He had obeyed them. He had justified them countless times in the name of order. But he had never imagined hearing them aimed at himself. Skywalker hesitated, breath sharp, shoulders rising and falling. His eyes flicked between the Chancellor and the broken Count, kneeling before him. Dooku saw the conflict in the young man's features, not moral conflict, but shock, fear, confusion. This was not a choice Skywalker expected to face. Not yet. Not like this. And that made Dooku understand something even more cruel. Sidious was not testing Skywalker. He was shaping him. Dooku forced himself to speak, voice a quiet rasp. "Chancellor, this wasn't the plan." He didn't know why he said it, perhaps an instinct, perhaps hope that there had been a mistake. But the moment the words left his lips, he realized the truth. There had never been a plan. Only manipulation. Sidious didn't even look at him. He kept his gaze locked on Skywalker, feeding the young man's anger, his fear, his need for approval. "Do it," Sidious commanded softly. Dooku felt his heart freeze. He wanted to protest, to question, to beg, but he was a Sith Lord. He would not die pleading. So he held the words behind his teeth, swallowed them, and breathed slowly through the crushing betrayal. In that quiet breath, his entire life unfolded before him. He saw himself as a child, taken from Sereno. He saw Qui-Gon, smiling despite the rules. He saw the Jedi Council dismiss his warnings. He saw Ventress falling away from him. He saw Savage rising in fury. He saw the war endless, hollow, manufactured. He saw everything he had done for Sidious. Every crime, every lie, every death. And finally, he saw the role he had played, not as a partner, not as a Sith heir, not even as a leader. He had been a bridge, a stepping stone for the boy standing over him, a tool used to shape the very weapon that would now erase him. His hands, still bound, twitched uselessly in front of him. He could not defend himself. He could not run. He could only watch as Skywalker's grip tightened on the hilt. "Anakin," he whispered, barely audible. "Don't." The plea was instinct, not hope. Skywalker's eyes hardened. For a moment, a small, flickering moment, Dooku believed Sidious would intervene, that he would reveal the truth, stop the execution, and reclaim his loyal servant. But Sidious only leaned closer, voice dripping with false outrage. Kill him now." The words sealed everything. The silence from the Force finally made sense. It wasn't withholding guidance. It was mourning him. Dooku's breath shook, but his voice remained steady. "I was never meant to survive this, was I?" Sidious finally looked at him. A soft, cruel smile crossed his lips, the only answer Dooku would ever receive. That was the moment the last piece fell into place. Dooku had not misjudged the Jedi. He had misjudged the Sith. Skywalker raised his saber, and as the red blade at Dooku's throat met the blue blade of the boy who would replace him, Count Dooku of Sereno realized the truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. He had devoted everything to a master who had never seen him as anything at all. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Dooku knelt with his wrists bound in cold metal, the blue glow of Skywalker's blade washing over his face. Sidious waited only a few steps away, his expression calm, patient, expectant. Outside, the ship groaned under the weight of battle. But inside this chamber there was only silence. The kind of silence that follows truth. Dooku had lived a long life shaped by choices, some noble, some monstrous, all deliberate. He had walked away from the Jedi. He had embraced the Sith. He had built an army, ignited a war, and watched galaxies burn in the hope of rebuilding them. Every action he took had purpose. But this moment had none. He was not dying for a cause. He was not dying for an ideal. He was dying because the man he trusted needed him gone. Skywalker's hands trembled, not with mercy, with conflict, with the sudden realization that execution was different from battle, that killing a kneeling man was something else entirely. Dooku watched him with a strange sense of calm. This boy had never understood the cost of power. Now he was being forced to pay it. Dooku finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anakin, I was never your enemy." Skywalker didn't respond. He couldn't. Sidious's presence pressed down on him like a weight on the chest, suffocating, shaping, controlling. "Good," Sidious murmured, his voice smooth as oil. "Do it." The words sealed Dooku's fate. And in that exact instant, something inside Dooku broke not with fear but clarity. He saw his entire journey, as if the Force had peeled it open before him. The boy on Serenno who felt abandoned, the Padawan who wanted truth, the Jedi Knight who watched corruption spread like disease, the Master who loved Qui-Gon but never said it, the Count who sought order, the Sith who created war. He saw his mistakes. He saw his intentions. He saw his blindness. And above all, he saw Sidious's hand behind everything, guiding, twisting, using him at every step. He had not been the architect. He had been the tool. A bridge between eras. A lesson carved into Anakin's soul. A sacrifice disguised as partnership. The truth was cruel in its simplicity. Sidious had never planned for two. There had only ever been one. Skywalker's blade twitched forward as if pushed by something deeper than his own will. Dooku's breath caught, not with fear, but with understanding so complete it felt like release. He did not beg. He did not scream. He did not curse the man who condemned him. Instead, he closed his eyes. For the first time since he was a child, he stopped fighting. Skywalker's saber cleaved through flesh and bone. It was quick, final, silent. Dooku's head fell away from his body, rolling across the floor with a soft thud. His expression froze in an eerie calm, eyes closed, lips slack, as if he were already drifting somewhere far beyond the war he had helped create. His body slumped forward, collapsing like an empty robe. And that was it. No ceremony. No farewell. No legacy to protect him. Sidious looked down at the remains of his former apprentice, then turned away without a second glance. Dooku's death was not a tragedy to him. It was a step, a necessity, a moment in a plan too vast for remorse. Skywalker stood frozen, breathing hard, staring at what he had done. His face twisted with shock, disgust, shame, emotions Sidious would soon smother beneath promises of purpose. Behind them, the ship continued to burn. In the chaos of war, Count Dooku's death went unnoticed. In the halls of the Jedi Temple, it would be reported as the fall of a tyrant. In the Senate, it would be a victory. In history, it would be a line. But in the Force, in the place where truth cannot be hidden, the passing of Tyrannus echoed like a quiet, sorrowful note. A warning unheard. A life misunderstood. A man who died without justice. And as the galaxy moved on, the truth of his final breath faded into silence. The silence he had felt all along. They didn't honor him. They didn't even mention his name. When Count Dooku died, there was no public trial, no state funeral, no mourning. The Jedi called him lost. The Republic labeled him a traitor. The Sith discarded him like ash. He was a man who shaped the galaxy, yet no world paused to notice his end. In the Jedi Temple, his name was whispered not in sorrow, but in warning. To the Order, he was proof that power corrupts, that even the wisest can fall. But no one asked why he left. No one looked deeper. In the halls of the Republic, senators pretended he'd never served them, that he hadn't once stood beside them, negotiating peace, resolving conflict. His efforts were erased, his speeches archived and forgotten, as if removing his name could undo the truth he spoke. Even among the Sith, his death meant nothing. There was no ritual, no legacy. Sidious never spoke of him again. Dooku had been a tool, a weapon to be used, then silenced. He thought he was building a future. In reality, he was laying bricks for his own grave. And yet, the war continued. The clone army marched. The Jedi darkened. The Senate twisted. The Empire he feared was still coming, not despite his death, but because of it. He was gone, but the shadow he left was everywhere. A man erased, but never unwritten. Dooku saw it long before the galaxy did. The corruption, the decay, the greed behind every Senate vote. While Jedi meditated in marble halls, the people suffered. Dooku didn't need Sith teachings to see the truth. He only had to look at the Republic he once served and see what it had become. Worlds begged for aid. They were ignored. Systems pleaded for protection. They were taxed. Corporations grew richer. Senators grew quieter. Behind polished smiles were bribes, threats, secrets. The Republic called it diplomacy. Dooku called it what it was: rot. He tried to fight it once, tried to speak truth in front of the council. They listened, but only enough to scold, to warn. They told him peace required patience, that justice must wait for process. But Dooku had seen too much. So he walked away, and when war came, the same Jedi who called him traitor became generals. The same Republic he tried to warn gave emergency powers to a Sith. Everything he predicted came true, and still, no one said his name. Because admitting he was right meant admitting they were blind. He wasn't proud, he wasn't smug, he was tired. Tired of screaming into silence, tired of watching everything he loved die under the weight of loyalty. The Republic proved him right, but never forgave him for it. And in that final irony, Count Dooku became exactly what he tried to stop. A warning, unheeded, until it was too late. The Empire rose quickly, too quickly for the galaxy to understand what had happened. One day, it was the Republic. The next, it was something colder, sharper, wrapped in the same flag, wearing the same face. Order 66 echoed across the stars like a whispered storm. Jedi fell in moments. Clone troopers obeyed without hesitation. Worlds that once trusted the Republic felt the iron weight of the Empire settle onto their skies. And Dooku wasn't there to see any of it. But it all carried his fingerprints. The clone army he unknowingly funded. The separatist war he led into chaos. The fear he helped ignite in the Senate. The power he helped place in Sidious's hands. He thought he was building correction. He had built collapse. The new empire didn't honor him. It didn't need to. It thrived on the very structure he helped create: a galaxy exhausted, divided, desperate for someone strong enough to stop the bleeding. Sidious provided the cure, but Dooku had provided the wound. Every law the Emperor passed, every world he conquered, every Jedi he hunted, all of it sprouted from seeds Dooku had planted with absolute certainty. The order he dreamed of had been twisted into obedience. The peace he chased became oppression. The future he fought for was born, but shaped into something he never asked for. The Empire was his legacy. Not the man he was, but the shadow he left behind. A shadow others would live under, long after he was gone. History did not keep his face. It did not carry his teachings. It did not whisper his doubts. Count Dooku slipped out of the galaxy's memory the same way he slipped out of the Jedi Order, quietly, without resistance, without anyone turning back to look. But the Force remembered him. It remembered the boy taken from Sereno, trying to be perfect. It remembered the knight who questioned too much. It remembered the master who loved his student but never said it. It remembered the Sith who wanted order, not chaos. None of these truths survived in records. None appeared in holobooks. To the galaxy, he was a villain, a traitor, a tyrant who led a war and paid the price. His death was considered justice. His life, a warning. Yet, in the quiet corners of history, a softer truth lived. Dooku was not a monster. He was a believer. He believed the galaxy could be healed. He believed the Jedi had lost their way. He believed Sidious shared his vision. And when all those beliefs shattered, so did he. In his last breath, he found no redemption, no forgiveness, only clarity, a clarity that came too late to save him or the galaxy he tried to guide. But the irony remained. Everything he feared happened. Everything he warned against unfolded. Everything he tried to prevent became real. Dooku died forgotten, but the galaxy he shaped never escaped his shadow.